Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story Ancient Tomb, The War Between Gods and Monsters, the final book in the creepy fantasy series. Fleeing the nightmares of Coldthistle House, Louisa and her friends have taken up in a posh new London residence. But religious zealots from the shepherd's army are flocking to the city in droves, and ominous warnings are being left on Louisa's very doorstep. With the evil influence of her father's spirit growing stronger, Louisa knows she'll have to pick a side in the coming war between the old gods, whether shed light or not. Louisa will do whatever it takes to save herself, even if it means returning to Coldthistle House. And when she strikes another devil's bargain with Mr. Morningside, she's forced to join his supernatural staff on a journey to a gateway between worlds, a place of legend, the Tomb of Ancients. But as always, Louisa knows there's a catch. In this epic finale to Madeleine Roux's gripping House of Furies series, eerie photographs and beautiful illustrations from artist Iris Compayet help bring to life a world where gods and monsters are at war and no one will escape the battle unscathed. Chapter 21. 1247, west of Cappadocia. There was nothing for it, I was never going to sleep. We burned Faraday's body far off the road, then returned to our initial camp to collect the horses and ride out. None of us were keen to sleep so close to where the demon had met his doom. Nobody spoke, though I could feel Ara working her way up to a lecture, her mouth a tight line as we galloped through the night. We stopped leagues from our destination, in the last vestige of hills before the land descended into a shallow valley and the salt lake began. I crawled out of my bedroll and found a place to relieve myself, then noticed I was not alone in my sleeplessness. Henry stood at the edge of our little camp, arms crossed, his eyes inscrutable as he stared out at the white valley below. The salt. I know he does not share my fear of the place, but I can think of nothing but Faraday's warnings. And that creature. It was not one of ours, and it apparently wasn't one of Henry's demonic friends, either. I'm going to say it again, I whispered. He didn't move. I think we should pack it in and go home. This has become something else, Henry. It's more than an obsession, it's more than dangerous. All perfectly reasonable, I assure you, he finished. He ran a hand through his wild black hair and inched toward me, then laid his head on my shoulder and blew out of breath. Do you ever think about it, eternity? Occasionally. Leave it to Henry to distract me with philosophy. I think about it all the time, he said. I don't want to be old. How long will it take to be old? I already feel ancient, and by our standards I'm a child. It's ghastly. Oh hush, you will never look old, I chuckled. Not on the outside. But on the inside I feel it already on me inside. Like I'm breathing coffin dust. Like I'm already entombed. But it just goes on for us. I don't know if I can bear it. What will I do? Take up needlepoint? No answer would suit him, but I had to try. He was inconsolable when he descended into one of his melancholic moods. I wrapped my arm around his waist and held him close and hoped that touch would bring him back to himself. You'll be wise and powerful. You can. I don't know, live up a mountaintop and dispense wisdom to any who dare make the climb. Don't be ridiculous. There's no gelid lamb up a mountain. But you will be wise, I said. You could be wise now and listen to us. Ara agrees this is a fool's errand. I have no idea what you will be like when you're old, but by God, I should like to see it. He kissed my chin and then turned away, unwinding himself from my grasp. I love you, you spicy imp, but you're wrong. I know what I'm doing. I know what I can look forward to. I think I know what eternity looks like. Only a few steps from me. He stopped and then turned, hurling one more question my way. Honestly, Dal, can you live with what we did to them? We all but snuffed out a flame, simply because it dared to burn before us. Will you promise me something? Yes, I replied, meaning it. Anything. promise me you'll come with me when I find the binders. If I can find where the books are made, promise me you'll come see the place. Something itched at the back of my mind, but stupidly, I agreed. I promise, I said. I'll come with you. In the morning, Henry woke us at an ungodly hour. The horses had already been saddled, the packs readied, and Bartholomew fed. A traveller's breakfast of hard biscuits, nuts, and stewed greens had been prepared, and Henry paced impatiently while I bolted down my share. Then we were riding, all of it happening so fast that neither Ara nor myself had time to stop him. That was the idea, of course, because he knew we were tired of playing along. Look there, he called as we descended toward the plains. A few nomads dotted the edge of the lake. They won't go near the center. We must be close. Henry. Ara and I had called out to him in unison, but he raced ahead, spurring his horse with flashing heels, the brown and black-spotted beast dashing down the embankment. I had spent plenty of hours in the saddle, but Henry was the vastly superior horseman. We gave chase, and now Ara did not appear angry but concerned. Her brows were permanently knit, her lower lip trembling. Well, stop him, I yelled to her over the whip of the wind. I don't know that we can. Ara's hood fell back, her iron grey and black hair flying free of its ribbon, streaming behind her like a pennant as we pursued Henry down to the salt. Tuz-gl. The sea of crystalline white stretching out before us made my breath catch and my heart throb. It was a beautiful place, unearthly, a flat glistening dish of diamonds so vast its edges could not be seen once we descended. The sky seemed bluer here, the horizon just a suggestion, almost as if we had stumbled upon the edge of the world. And there was Henry, riding right into it, the top crust of salt breaking, water splashing the knobby knees of his horse. The nomads scattered at his approach, and by the time Ara and I caught up to him, we three and Bartholomew were alone. The place was emptiness itself, the salt and water making tricks of the light, rainbows cascading across the ground, rippling at the slightest touch. Henry swore and jumped down from his mount, letting it go. He wandered forward into the desert of eerie white, pressing his hand to his forehead against the sun. "Where is it?" he whispered. "This is the salt. It has to be here." Ara and I watched as he cut a line through the center of the salt flat, shallow water sloshing around his sandals. He trudged on, impervious to the sun and glare, determined to make his pilgrimage. What do we do? I twisted in the saddle, holding Bartholomew, my hands shaking with powerlessness. Nothing will stop him. We can only protect him now. Ara dismounted, grunting under the weight of the book and the pack. I joined her, and together we trailed behind, retracing Henry's path through the salt. When we reached him, his face glowed red with fury. "If that idiot demon lied to me." "There," Ara said, pointing. "Old tracks. They lead deeper into the salt." Henry hurried in that direction, the shallow water deepening as we traveled toward the center of the salt flat, his tracks swallowed up. His robes were soaked to his knees, but he ignored it, fixated on the unbroken crust and the strange imprints that were too delicate to have cracked it. He stopped a hand's breadth from the intact salt and reached out, running his fingers lightly over the shapes. As I neared, I saw that they looked remarkably like giant paws. "Unwilling," he muttered, almost feverish. "Unwilling, damn you, where are you?" There came a deep rumbling from beneath the earth. I stumbled, grabbing onto Ara as she grabbed onto me. Bartholomew whined and burrowed under my robe, hiding his muzzle under my armpit. The sun flashed off the mirror of salt, blinding me, then the brightness exploded outward, sending a hot wave across the desert. The salt under and around us softened and then sank, becoming hard and flat until we stood on a perfect alabaster disc. The blast had knocked Henry to his knees, where he stayed, all of us silent and watchful as the tracks in the salt shook, then lowered, a gradual ramp cutting itself into the ground. I had seen such things in Egypt, smooth, glittering architecture cut neatly into limestone. At the very bottom, perhaps half a kilometer into the earth, a door appeared. Under my robes, I had begun to sweat badly, and I nudged Ara, who wouldn't take her eyes from the door. It was too late now, I thought, to forget this madness and go home. A simultaneous loathing and curiosity rooted me to the spot, for I wondered what might emerge from that door, and what lay beyond it. Something moved in the darkness, a figure stepping through the square-cut door. At first I thought it was another of the scorpion creatures, but as it climbed the ramp toward us, it became clear that it was half woman, its lower half that of a lioness. That explained the paw prints. More than that, she had not 2 human arms but 6 all told, the extra 2 pairs folded back slightly, like wings at rest. She approached slowly, and I couldn't help wondering if that was to give us time to change our minds and flee. And I longed to do just that. The sun vanished, and the desert was plunged instantly into night. Gasping, I watched the darkness light up with more stars than one sky ought to hold. Not just stars, shapes. I did not fancy myself an astronomer, but even I knew these were not ordinary constellations, and that no stars in the firmament glowed so brilliantly. The moon, perfect as a pearl, hung full and fat and too close to us, nearer than I had ever seen it. The creature finished her journey up the ramp and observed us, her eyes cat-like, her skin a buttery gold, like that of her lioness half. A blue, beaded curtain hung from her neck, chiming softly when she moved. Around her neck and shoulders lay a snake draped there, as white as the salt, though its head held no eyes and its mouth ever opened, a toothless tube that sucked at the air. Henry stared up at her, marveling, still on his knees. "I am Malatrice," she said. The stars burned clearer when she spoke. "One who opens the door, who is willing." "I am." Henry jumped to his feet. "Am willing." "And these others?" she asked. He turned and stretched out his hands, pleading with his eyes. I had never seen Henry look so helpless before. "Please," he mouthed. "I am willing to," Ara spoke up, taking a step forward. I gazed into the doorkeeper's eyes, and what I found there frightened me. She would know if I lied. I thought of Faraday Focala the demon, and of his madness, his wounds, his horrible descent. Had he been truly willing, or had he passed that first test only to fail the next? Sometimes to protect the people we love, we have to disappoint them. "I'm sorry, Henry," I said, holding Bartholomew close to my chest. Dalton. Don't you dare do this, don't you dare." He advanced toward me, yellow eyes flaring wide. "You spineless shit. Did you come all this way just to betray me? Is this amusing to you? Did the shepherd put you up to this?" "I don't need to answer that." I stepped back. "Just listen to yourself, and you will know exactly what I'm doing." "No." Henry flung himself toward Ara, spinning her around. He tore the black Albion out of the bag and shook it in my face. "There must be something else. There must be a way to be free. Free from this book, free from this guilt." He wilted, hugging the book and falling again to his knees. The journey was ending, he could feel it, and so could I, but it was not the ending he'd hoped for. Not for the first time. He changed in front of my eyes, pitiful now. "Unmoored. You promised," he spat. "You promised." I didn't see it then. I backed away, slowly, backed away from him, from it all. "I didn't know your purpose, and I won't help you destroy that book. Damn it, I won't lose you." Henry scrambled to his knees, a spark of hope in his eyes, one I already knew I would be responsible for stamping out. "Go to judgment. Bring back the white book, bring it here. We can free ourselves together. I know there's something else, Dalton, I know it. Trust me." "I'm sorry," I said again, watching that light flicker and die. "I won't help you do this. Forgive me." "No." He swiveled back toward Ara and Malatrice, leaving me behind in the salt. "No, Dalton, I don't forgive you. I never will." The field lay before us, pocked with holes, the already damaged fence on the border now a dwindling fire. I had never known whether the residents could actually leave the confines of Cold Thistle House, but now I had my answer as they hovered in wait, no longer with any walls between us, an army of floating black shapes. "Mrs. Hallam stood at the center of the mass. "Now's your big chance, Poppy," Chijok was saying. His eyes glowed red, standing out sharply from his dark skin. With Mary here again, you can scream your little heart out. It was odd, going into battle with a child at my side, but she had helped save my life once before, and I knew better than to question her power. I have so many bundled up, Poppy said, grinning. But I hope it is enough. The only one among us missing from the east lawn was Mr. Morning sighed. He hadn't emerged yet from the house, and there was no telling what plan he might be concocting. Mary and Lee stood next to Chidioke, though Lee was wobbly with illness, the presence of so many adjudicators making him green in the face. And there were many. Dalton had called it a host, but with their golden bodies filling the sky, the glare made it difficult to count them. Moonless Kent was forced to stay by my side, as I had an entire drawer of cutlery ready to transform for him. There were a few stray pistols and a hunting rifle in the house that were brought along too, though I doubted they would do much against this motley arrangement of foes. Bar Nephilim, Kent muttered, spitting in the grass. I thought I killed the last of those ugly fiends in Giza. I had hoped only to ever read of them in Bennett's journal, but Kent was right. The huge, misshapen giants with their faces full of wasps lumbered toward the charred remains of the fence. I could hear the steady humming of the bees above their heavy footsteps. The six-winged, sword-wielding warriors above them were familiar, too, as were the cries of Sanctus as they charged toward the house. It isn't at all like reading a book, I murmured, hoarse. Kent reached for my hand and squeezed it. You wouldn't happen to be hiding a sky snake under those skirts? Just petticoats, I lamented. Then I turned a hard look toward the advancing enemies, too numerous even to contemplate. This had to be the bulk of the shepherd's army, and our last stand against them would have to be enough of a distraction to let Dalton slip by. There was no sign of the shepherd, but then Mr. Morningside was still absent too. Kent, if I need to let father take over, I will draw you back when the time comes, he said, pressing my hand again. I had expected him to relish this chance for war and bloodshed, but his eyes were sad. You make the javelins, I throw them. Father is only if we find ourselves overrun, yes. Of course. But what I really meant was, I shall try. And also, are we not already overrun? The shepherd's resistance was far beyond what I had expected or imagined, and for a brief moment I understood Henry's dark motivations. This was what he feared when collecting his souls, this annihilation at the hands of former allies. Maybe it was always going to come to this. Maybe peace between folk so different simply could not be. What is it, Kent asked. I was only thinking, this is all such foolishness. Do we not all inhabit this place within a place we should be friends? Yes. He nodded, rubbing his jaw. But these servants of Ro, they do not look very friendly today. I strained to hear him above the noisy buzzing of the wasps and the beating of so many golden wings. We waited, silent, Bartholomew poring listlessly at the ground, Mary and Chidioke holding hands while the residents drifted back and forth at our flank. They all might be hurt. They might be killed. Mary, I called out, intending to say something, anything, that might express my gratitude, my relief, that I had wished her into being all those years ago, trapped in a cupboard while my parents argued, desperate for one true friend to distract me from the misery. She had just turned toward me when the first adjudicator dropped out of the sky, hurtling toward us with two golden axes raised high. Finch had to be among them, I thought, but it was impossible to sort them out from the giant, floating phalanx of gold. That was the signal that broke the restless peace, and soon giants swarming with bees and screaming six-winged demons surged toward us across the field. For an instant it was so startling, so terrifying, that I froze. But then there was father. Blood, he helpfully reminded me. More blood. No, came my answer, less blood shed by my friends. The only way to get through this was to protect my companions, no matter the cost. Mother had at first refused to assist, but at my nudging, she'd agreed to do what defensive spells she could. She stood closest to the house, in the shade of the overhang outside the kitchens. The ground all around us trembled and shook, then hundreds of hidden roots burst from below, rising high into the air before twining themselves together, forming a thick fence. I heard the Nephilim giants rush up against the roots, fists striking, little wasp wings a symphony of furious frustration. The root fence did little against the winged enemies that soared above and then quickly dipped back below. They came 100 across, a golden lance whipping into the ground beside me. The lances. Of course. At once I fell to work, feeling the anxious blood gather in my face as I took up knife after knife and closed my eyes, a short reprieve from the chaos while I transformed the cutlery with my changeling powers. Kent handily took the lances from me as they formed, hurling them at any adjudicator or seraphim that flew too close. His aim was good but not perfect. A few slipped by his assault, and a long-haired female made of liquid gold landed not 10 paces away. Arves, arves, arves. Kent held out his hand to me and flexed his fingers. Hurry, hurry, hurry. I panicked and felt the knife in my grasp slip, tumbling to the grass. Shrieking, I knelt to find it, feeling a rush of air over my head as Bartholomew leapt cleanly above my back, colliding with the upworlder and taking her hard to the ground. Her screams were quickly silenced, but my eyes were closed in concentration, transforming another knife for Kent and telling myself I could not afford to slip up again. Chijoke did his best with a hunting rifle, his aim skilled but the reload slow. Mary's bright, glittering shield surrounded us, deflecting javelins hurled from every direction as the shepherd's winged forces circled above, swarming. I could see Poppy jumping up and down, jittery with excitement, waiting for the right moment to unleash hell. The residents slipped along our sides, no more than swift back blurs, and then they drifted up through Mary's shield, high enough to reach the golden adjudicators that controlled the air. Reaching for a fork to transform, I glanced upward, watching as a resident overtook one of the host, enveloping it as if it were swallowing the creature whole. But it merely stripped the adjudicator's shining energy away, leaving the enemy in their mundane and decidedly flightless state. Startled, shouting, the poor thing plunged to the ground, reaching behind for wings that had disappeared. That same resident shimmered into nothingness afterward, breaking apart as the light it had swallowed dissolved the shadow. There were perhaps a dozen more residents lifting into the air, but that was all Mrs. Hallam had brought. I was getting down to the spoons, exhausted, every transformed piece of silverware taking a little more out of me. Falling to my knees, I tried to catch my breath, finding the air devilishly hard to swallow. Breathe, Kent reminded me. He had broken a heavy sweat from the effort, black hair matted back on his forehead, shirt sleeves soaked. We may just make it through this. I glanced behind, watching Mother chant wordlessly while she kept the root barrier strong and stable. Mrs. Hallam, however, looked far worse. She had run out of shadow servants and endeavored to make more, slicing at her hands to make her minions, pulling from the meager shadows around the edge of the mansion. Had we battled at night, she might have instantly produced another dozen reinforcements. The few she managed to create, their strange, fat heads blossoming out from the shade of a crate or a flower pot, birthed themselves into the ether, then immediately shot into the sky. Blood stained the front of her skirts, and she was beginning to look alarmingly pale. The clamour against the root wall increased. 6 of the wasp-faced giants crashed against it in unison with their shoulders. They were serviceable enough battering rams, and soon the wood began to splinter, then give. I gasped, watching a single, thick arm punch through the fence. Not long after, the menace had torn open space enough to crawl through. Poppy, get ready, I cried, then made another lance for Kent, dashing toward Mrs. Hallam. I skidded to a stop next to her and reached for my own skirts, tearing strips of fabric from the bottom and using them to bind her badly bleeding arms. Stop, girl, I know what I'm doing, she muttered, her voice more rasping than usual. You'll bleed to death, you stubborn old witch, let me help. She gnashed her teeth but allowed it, and I at least managed to staunch the bleeding on her forearms and near her elbows. But as soon as I bound a wound, she made another, the knife flashing as she cut into her skin through the frock. That's enough now, Mrs. Halem whispered. Go do something useful. Useful, of course. She wanted me to dip into Father's powers and end the battle early. But I couldn't, not when we might win without his help. I feared too much what it would mean for me if I relied on him. Every moment of greater influence seemed to stitch some piece of him to my brain permanently. I returned to Kent's side, handing off another lance, my hands shaking from lack of strength. His throws were weakening, too, and he grunted loudly with each toss. I had no stomach for it, I knew, cringing whenever my eyes fell on another fallen body on the grass. It was a relief, of course, that we were holding them off, but I felt no real animus toward the shepherd people. Sparrow had been the one thorn in my side, and now she was gone. These deaths felt utterly meaningless, wasteful, and they piled up, one after another, beautiful golden forms falling out of the sky, spinning lazily downward like some grotesque hunting party gone awry. The numbers in the sky dwindled, but the fight before us on the field had only just begun. The Nephilim, buzzing and angry, lumbered toward us, picking up speed. The spoon in my hand refused to change. I closed my eyes, I squeezed hard, and I channeled the last strips of wool in my body toward the bloody thing, but nothing happened. I could sense Kent's hand waving in front of me, but there was nothing I could do. I'm sorry, I whispered, feeling tears slip down my face. I have nothing left. The thunder of the giant's feet masked a different kind of rumbling. To my right, from around the front of the house, came a spray of grass and gravel. The cavalry, so to speak, had arrived. Fathom, Giles, and Niles rode onto the field, Fathom screaming bloody murder as she cocked her pistol and fired at speed. They each managed a shot off toward the giants before circling back around to us, slowing their horses and fishing out their small arsenal of pistols and rifles. Just like the old days at Auntie Glynn's, shooting pheasant in Somerset, Giles called. He and his brother had come in matching hunting flannels done in the most fashionable purpling green plaids. Good to see you again, Miss Louisa, though I do wish it were under less calamitous circumstances. No time for pleasantries, I called back, managing a weary smile. But your aid is most welcome. Where is Morningside? Chichioke muttered, trying to unjam his rifle before giving up and accepting a fresh gun from Niles. I shared his curiosity and glanced toward the house. Inside, I saw Dalton briefly at the kitchen window, and then he was gone, disappeared, a sharp popping sound reaching us even through the walls. That still didn't account for Mr. Morningside's tardiness. Had he left us? Had the bastard really abandoned us to fight his war while he retreated to safety? Mary dropped her shield for a moment to rest and recover while Mother tried in vain to repair her wall. Smaller bursts of roots shot from the earth, but they did little more than trip up the giants, who collected themselves and pressed on. They would be upon us any moment. There was no more I could do for Kent. I scrambled to my feet and went to Poppy, putting a tremulous hand on her shoulder. As soon as you can make out the wasps on their faces, give it your all. I am so ready, Louisa. I have not done a scream in a very long time, and it hurts so to be bottled up. Bartholomew came to stand in front of the girl, guarding her, licking the copious blood from his paws. The melee had changed him, and he had never looked more like a hellhound, with a rigid spine of dark fur and slavering jaws. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Mrs. Halem collapse to the ground. Before I could go to aid her, a flood of gold brightened the horizon. More adjudicators. As many or more than had come before. Stars, Mary cried, covering her mouth. He must have called back his folk from every corner of the earth. Now, do you think, Louisa? Poppy asked. I told her, my heart sinking to my toes. Now. Do it now. While Poppy readied herself, I disappeared to tend to Mrs. Halem, trusting the little girl to know when her power would help us most. She looked almost proud, like a soldier, and I wished that it was not so, that she was not a child forced into this war, that she could be somewhere at play holding her dog and singing songs, not using her voice for bloody mayhem. Chapter 22. I never disliked you. The bedlam behind me twisted her words into nonsense. It took me a moment to untangle them, just as I untangled another torn strip of skirt to tie around her thigh. There was no pretense of housekeeper and serving girl now, no stations, no polite barriers, Mrs. Haylam's wiry leg was stuck out toward me, propped in my lap while I wrapped it with coarse cloth. Did I accuse you of such things? I asked, shaking my head. Before, I had seen just glimpses of the tattoos on her arms, always peeking out from her sleeve, but now I came to realize that underneath the sober, high-knit gown she was covered in markings. Having suffered one such agony on my palm, I couldn't imagine what she had endured to become that way. The way you look at me, girl. Always fleeting. Nervous. I was hard because I sensed the cleverness in you. The strength. She coughed, a trickle of blood running down her chin, and I flinched. Even before your father came, I wasn't hard enough on Henry, and look how he turned out. In one of the last of his true allies. He was never soft, never kind, and it forced them all away. We could use a couple of demons right about now. I'm going to tell him you said that, you know, I teased, hoping it would bolster her spirits. Do it. I won't be around to suffer his complaints. I won't have you speaking that way. Where is Mr. Morningside? Why isn't he helping us? I pressed. He's making preparations. But like always, he will be fashionably late. Tragically late, more like. I thought more about what she had said about Henry never being soft or kind. He had been, in my eyes, for a time to her and Dalton, at least. He had taken in many of my kind out of guilt, but now, stopping briefly, I glanced around, looking at us all battling against the Upwalders. Fighting for him. And where was he? Why was he absent at his own fight? I felt suddenly angry, furious, dangerously furious, so much so that I felt father flash against the weak membrane holding him at bay. These weren't demons like Faraday putting their lives on the line for Henry's house and livelihood. It was us. The cruel unfairness of it cut, and I wondered if maybe this was what Dalton wanted me to see in his diary. That it would always come to this, Henry hiding and scheming, while everyone else did the dirty work for him. Even his one and only true friend lay bleeding and suffering. I finished tying off her upper leg and sat back on my haunches, then turned at the sound of a gun volley. The bullets did next to nothing against the giants. Mary's barrier extended outward again, enshrouding us, the noise of the battle growing dimmer for a moment. Then Poppy stepped forward and threw back her head, balled up her fists, and let loose one of her bone-piercing shrieks. The nearest wave of adjudicators fell, gripping their heads in agony, distracted enough to become easy targets for our crack shooters. Poppy had weakened our foes, leaving them far more vulnerable to gunfire. I watched the Nephilim fall back, deterred, but only briefly. Her scream, no matter how powerful, was not enough to turn the tide. When it was done, I saw Chijioke go to comfort Poppy, who began crying, disappointed and afraid. "Where is Morningside?" Chijioke shouted, clutching Poppy. "Damn him. We need his help. Are you prepared to watch them die, Mrs.?" Halem whispered. More blood poured from her mouth. "Are you ready to have that on your shoulders?" The thunder of the giant's feet neared, deafening. A hail of javelins fell against Mary's barrier, which itself would fall soon as she grew tired. Kent could do nothing, for I had no spears to give him, and he had but a rudimentary knowledge of rifles. I sighed and stood, knowing what had to be done, however much I dreaded it. "Louisa," Mother pleaded with me softly, but I turned my back on her. "Let the child do what she must, Mrs." Halem said. "Let her choose." I took a deep breath, smelled the gore and gunpowder all around us, felt the quaking of the ground. It would be easy enough to summon father. This was his chosen arena, his natural element. He craved bloodshed, and now, at last, I would give him as much as he could stomach. For my part, I had already seen more than enough. In my head, father's soul snapped and snarled and raged, denied his feast. Then the glass behind us shattered. It seemed as if the whole of the house had imploded, but it was only the windows. I covered my head, shrieking as shards of glass rained down on us, and then, with the fluttering of 1,000 wings, birds gushed from the mansion. They were a riot of colour and sounds, their cast of feathers joining the shower of glass from the windows. Brushing debris off my shoulders, I marvelled at their speed, following their trajectory as they all but erased the sky. Whenever a bird found a target, be it winged foe or giant, it would burst in a cascade of feathers that flowed into wisps of silver. Those blobs coalesced, then formed ghostly figures. The souls. He had at last released the army of souls he had reaped and stored in his birds. Mr. Morningside appeared directly after, loping out from the kitchen with a cup of tea. He downed it in one gulp and threw the porcelain against the nearest wall. Fashionably late, I screamed at him, exasperated. Mr. Morningside shrugged and strode past me, tending to Mrs. Haylam. But still fashionable. Still want the deed. Sorry, I seem to have made a mess. I hate you, I seethed back. That's allowed. He shot a look over his shoulder, just in time for Dalton to appear, a heavy bag strapped to his back, also departing through the open kitchen door. You can hate me later. It appears it is time for you to go. The souls shrieked as they regained their forms, and I had to lean closer to Henry just to divine a single word. Gunfire. Screaming. The dull thud of javelins hitting Mary's barrier. It was all too much, and I had only just pulled myself back from the mental brink. Kent sprinted to meet us, putting himself between me and the field of battle. What's going on? He demanded. You're going, Mr. Morningside said. Leave this bit of bother to us, you have work to do. He's got the book, Louisa. Now it's time for you to do as you promised. Take the dog, man, he's useless without a moon around. Mother is coming too, I told him. She isn't meant for this kind of bloodshed. The tide seemed to be turning, with Mr. Morningside's birds allowing our side to gain more ground. That didn't erase my concern completely, and I hated the thought of leaving even one of my friends behind. Mr. Morningside sighed and rolled his eyes, then gestured to Mother. I'm only agreeing because she's apparently useless. Now go, well, keep them busy while you four depart. So sudden, I murmured, feeling as if the ground had been knocked out from under me. Where are we going? Helmsley Castle. It isn't far. Dalton has your instructions. Mr. Morningside clasped me by the arm, and not for the first time. I wondered if this would be our final meeting. He was suddenly serious, oblivious to the violence bearing down. And Louisa, good luck. I know you won't let me down. There was no time to say goodbye, a fact that would haunt me for the entirety of the ride. I just don't know what to expect, I told Kent and Mother, who sat across from me in the carriage. We had taken the roughshod carriage Chidioke used for errands, with Dalton in the driver's box, a cloak wrapped around the book on his lap. And I couldn't say a word to Mary or Chidioke. Or God, Lee and Poppy, how will I explain any of this to them? They will understand, Mother assured me. She had recovered quicker than I expected, sitting upright and calm, her veil draped over her face. The mourning garb seemed appropriate. You are walking into the unknown, child. There will be time for apologies later. Kent, however, had climbed into the seat next to me, watching through the back window as the house disappeared in the distance. Helmsley Castle lay not far from Malton, which also struck me as fitting, going to the start to reach the end. Malton was nothing like Constantinople, and I hoped this wasn't some kind of trick. But it wouldn't surprise me in the least if this mysterious place, the unknown, as Mother had called it, had many doors. After all, the one Mr. Morningside had found in the diary had appeared out of thin air. Something is wrong. Kent pointed out the window, grumbling. What is it? I asked. They should be following. They should sack their strategist. A chariot leaves the battle, you follow. No matter how empty it looks, you follow. Either they are very stupid or we are riding into a trap. Stay alert, I told him. I have a bad feeling in my stomach. Mother watched me closely, the carriage rocking us all as Dalton spurred the horses and we flew down the road. I nestled down into the seat, exhausted, trying to recover some of my strength for the trials to come. Whatever we faced, it would require more than just following a few directions. Which reminded me. I pulled out the small scroll Mr. Morningside had provided. Dalton had handed it off to me before we departed the house and suggested that I memorize it. There wasn't much to it, and most of it I already knew. There will be riddles, I told them, and there must be something different about me. Morningside said he wasn't allowed inside, but that I should be able to pass. I cannot say too much about it just now. Even speaking of the ritual can summon horrid things to punish you. Perusua hubisu, Kent muttered, his nose still up to the rear window. More deceptions. But I shook my head at him. No. We're quite different, he and I. That is an understatement. Maybe, I mused aloud, rubbing my forehead, maybe only women can enter. Or perhaps only those with dark fey blood are allowed. If he tried to enter the tomb with Dalton and Ara, then that wouldn't work. Oh, I don't know, it's pointless to speculate. Mother leaned over and touched my knee, then lifted her veil and patted the seat next to her. I climbed across and settled down, then felt a warm, soothing sensation rush over me as she touched the side of her head to mine. Read the scroll. Recover yourself. I did, and it was far easier with her there. Just her touch had a way of obliterating my fears, a balm for the battle we had just endured and the battle no doubt to come. My thoughts eased, and though I still felt heavy-hearted from the bloodshed and from leaving behind so many of my friends, it did not feel so hopeless with her there. Flattening the parchment across my knee, I read over the brief lines written in Mr. Morningside's exceedingly elegant hand. They were what I expected, the riddles he had discovered, the answers he thought to be correct, and even the words to speak to call out the door. My eyes caught on one line in particular, and I felt a pang of sorrow deep in my chest. Now I was infinitely grateful that I had read the entirety of Dalton's diary. Without it, I would be in awful peril. For Mr. Morningside had lied. I read over his recounting of the riddle again and again, hoping it was a simple misspelling or error. But no, there was no way he had written the wrong answer by mistake. Either he wanted me to suffer, or he wanted me to fail. Or perhaps he was simply too dim-witted to count and realize that Faraday had been missing 3 fingers. 3. He had gotten every single riddle wrong, which meant... Something inside me hardened, a cluster of nerves that had been soft became steel, and I knew then that I would do what he could not. I would enter the tomb of ancients and behold all that he had wanted so badly to see and been denied. Arms to embrace, yet no hands. Pinches to give, yet no fingers. Poison to wield, yet no needle. Betrayers betrayed. Liars lied. The devil deceived. Or else Mr. Morningside was not as clever as he thought. Scorpion was not the answer, but I knew what was. Chapter 23. 1247 Tuz GL. I was about to mount my horse when I heard Ara's screams. The dog nestled in my robes, fussed and poked his head out of the collar, leaning into the sound of her agony. I tracked it, too, then, powerless to stop myself, I trotted back toward the center of the salt. Malatrice presided over a gruesome sight. Ara was on the ground, writhing, holding both hands over her eyes, her legs kicking at the diamond-hard ground. "What did you do to her?" Henry shouted, falling to her side. "I can see into her heart, as I see into yours, Dark One," the lion creature said. A droplet of blood, perfect and red, clung to the open mouth of her strange white snake. "You are truly willing to enter the tomb. She is not." "That's hardly cause to attack," I said, out of breath from sprinting to reach them. Malatrice, eyes glowing and gold, smiled at me, displaying pointed, regular teeth, all of them sharpened to gleaming daggers. "This is not a game for little children," she whispered, her smile never failing. "Through that door you play with cards of flesh and dice of bone, you wager in blood and sinew. Your friend the demon learned that the hard way. He did not take it well when Nera sucked the fingers from his hands. The pale snake around Malatrice's neck bobbed its head and coiled more tightly around its mistress. Ara's hands dropped away long enough for me to see that one eye was shut, blood weeping down her cheek. I had never heard her cry that way, in such childlike anguish, raw and helpless. "Come away with me, Henry," I whispered, kneeling with them and taking him by the arm. "Have you not seen enough? This place is cursed. Come away." "No." He wiped furiously at the tears on his face, tilting his head up to the doorkeeper. "No. The book must be destroyed. I have not come this far for nothing. I want answers. Do you hear me, wretch? I want answers." "That is my desire, too," Malatrice purred, unmoved by his shouting. It occurred to me that many had probably discovered clues to the binders and made this journey, making similar appeals. Any who encountered the books would want to understand their power and know how such things could be made. How many bumbling adventurers had she tortured and turned away? I make a meal of answers, or flesh, as the case may be. I harvest them. Riddles are the tool with which I till the field. Yes, the riddles. Henry was in a constant state of weeping, trying not to weep more, and wiping at his mouth with sloppy, desperate pouring. "I will answer your riddles, witch. Proceed." She laughed. The constellations above us spun and surged so bright it hurt to look up. "Bold. Bold and arrogant. I almost like you. Your flesh would taste of pride," Malatrice whispered, lightly petting the body of her pet snake. "You would do well to listen to your friend. You may be willing, Dark One, but this place is not for you. Only the dead may enter here, and you have so very much longer to live." Malatrice showed us her teeth again, and then, as if the whole sordid scene had been a nightmare, we woke, and she was gone. The salt crust broke under us and we sank into the shallow water. Daylight returned, the sun beaming over a cloudless sky. But the wound Ara had suffered was real, and though her hysterics had calmed, Henry's had not. No, he beat at his chest, standing, turning in every direction. Slicking both wet hands through his hair, he giggled, a deeply mad sound. "No, it cannot be. The book." He stared at it, soaking in the salt lake. The book. I was so close. No. Henry didn't notice that I had helped Ara to her feet, that she leaned against me, that she had taken up the book to carry back to the horses. He did not notice Bartholomew trying to lick at his hand, the only consolation he was likely to receive. Helmsley Castle, a fawn-coloured spike reaching up from a low hill, stood abandoned. Someone had maintained the grounds, but I heard no farmers or townsfolk from Moulton out for a stroll. The grass was slick still from the rains as we climbed toward the structure, and I felt compelled to stare holes into the back of Dalton's head. The medieval ruin towered above us, just one lingering facade, the rest of it long since crumbled away, which made it look, upon reflection, rather like a gate. Why didn't they follow us, I asked. Kent and Mother flanked me, though I could sense them watching Dalton, too. It seems foolish to just let us go. Henry told me he would create a distraction, Dalton said, stopping. He put one foot up on the higher level of the hill and twisted, resting his hands on his raised thigh. The fabric over his eyes was damp with sweat. He had to, or I never would have been able to go to Judgment and steal the book. Judgment, I repeated. Is that where you take people to be judged? Sparrow took me there once. It's another realm of some kind. Yes. Only accessible by us. You could only see it because Sparrow forced you to go. Was the book difficult to take? I asked. He wasn't volunteering much, and that only made me more nervous. I now knew Mr. Morningside was inadvertently or intentionally trying to sabotage me. I didn't need his old lover doing the same. To be frank with you. Sighing, Dalton shook his head and then began his way up the hill again. It was unguarded. There was no one there at all. Well, that's not suspicious. Kent picked up the pace, overtaking me and then Dalton, charging his way ahead. I was not going to let them beat me to the ruins, so I ran to catch up, hoping Mother would do the same. Wait, I managed to maneuver around the two men. I stooped and put my hands on my knees, still weak and out of breath from using my powers so recently. I want to trust you, Dalton, but why would you do this? You will be annihilating all of your own people, and for what? He crossed his arms over his suit and lifted his chin to the wind, letting it catch his hair and the bandage around his eyes. Breathing deep, he let it go through his nose. I will miss this place, but I'm tired. I'm tired of this fighting, this war. I'm tired of Henry. He thinks destroying us is revenge, but it is not so. I waited, giving Kent a dark look to keep him quiet. There will be no one left to blame when I'm gone, Dalton said, more to himself than to us. Now, how does that go? Yes, I tasted too what was called the sweet of revenge, but it was transient. It expired even with the object that provoked it. With that, he walked off across the green toward the remains of the castle, the rising gusts across the hills tearing at his coat. I followed, but Kent hesitated, and I was forced to nudge him along. No man that melancholy has betrayal on the mind. Come on, I said softly. He need not have brought the book. He need not have returned from judgment at all. We made a silent procession into the ruins, passing through the door and into the cool, shaded area beyond, which almost felt like a courtyard, but with no high walls to hem it in. Mother went to sit on one of the fallen chunks of wall, gazing up at the height of the castle front. I had memorized the scroll Mr. Morningside had given me, and I knew how to proceed. My only doubts lingered over whether or not to tell Dalton of his friend's deception or error. Stand in the very middle of the door, take 20 paces, then turn back and speak the words. Those were the instructions in the journal, and I did exactly that, holding on to one breath all the while, my heart pounding faster with each step. Kent stood rigidly to the side, alert, his purple eyes following me so intently they felt like physical pressure against my cheek. Dalton, however, seemed relaxed or perhaps resigned, hands in pockets as he admired the ruins. When I had gone 20 paces, I paused and swiveled back toward the door. Even though I knew what might come next, it felt like jumping off a cliff, hoping to find water at the bottom but feeling just as strongly that I might find stone. Dalton approached me silently, pulling the pack from his shoulders and handing it to me. It was unbelievably heavy, the canvas stopped shifting aside, showing me the gleaming white book within. Don't touch it, he warned with a gentle smile. It will burn. I have some experience there, I said. I'm going to begin now. He nodded. Are you certain this is what you want? It isn't too late, I said. You need to be rid of Father, and Henry needs to be rid of me. It will all be wrapped up neatly, I think. You'll see. I didn't see, but I decided to trust him, pulling on the bag and inhaling one last time, telling myself that I could face the trials, telling myself that I could achieve what Mr. Morningside could not. Unwilling. The effect was instantaneous. Night fell, the sky lighting up with 1,000 gleaming constellations, alligators and snakes, rams and spiders, stags and rabbits. The moon appeared, a circular white beacon that felt close enough to touch. Then the ramp appeared, cutting its way into the grass, the square black door appearing just under the door into the castle. Just as the diary described, Malatrice emerged shortly after, climbing the ramp with the almost bad air of someone going about their daily tedium. She might have been feeding the chickens or going to the baker's for bread. Dalton had failed to describe her beauty or the way the sudden constellations reflected in her feline eyes. She studied him first, in fact, grinning as if stumbling upon a long-lost friend. But I had been the one to call her, and she swiftly turned back to me. Mother and Kent sidled close, protectively so. I am Malatrice, she said, bowing her head just a little. One who opens the door, I interrupted. Yes, can we move this along? We're in a bit of a rush. That startled her, which felt good, honestly, and she gave another wide smile, recovering with a laugh. You are impatient, she said, licking her teeth. And willing. And these others? She asked. I saw Kent open his mouth to answer, but Mother stepped in front of him, pushing him away. Her smile matched that of Malatrice, though it contained far less contempt. I am willing. My eyes followed the horrid white snake as it travelled in a slow circle around Malatrice's shoulders. It had the same open, gaping mouth as the binder's fingers. Malatrice closed her eyes, the smile vanishing, and for a moment I was sure we had done something wrong. Mother was unwilling, or maybe I was unwilling. But then the doorkeeper blinked and sniffed, nodding her satisfaction. 2 willing hearts. 2 hearts that have known death. So that was what had kept Mr. Morningside from gaining entrance to the tomb. I had died briefly, just long enough for Father's soul to be guided into me, and Mother had been drained to the point of death for the ritual that bound her in that spider. Glancing up at her, her 8 pink eyes staring straight ahead, I wondered if she had known, or if she simply wanted to be there with me to face the challenges ahead. Whatever the explanation, she took my hand, and I felt better for it. Willing hearts. Immortal hearts. But are they wise? Malatrice mused. What falls but never breaks, and what breaks but never falls? Night and day, I said at once. Malatrice inclined her head, a flicker of irritation tightening her right eyelid. My leaves don't change but turn, what am I? That was the one puzzle Mr. Morningside had never managed to solve. He had written directly into the instructions that there would be one riddle that I must solve on my own. The answer seemed apparent to me right away, however, given the excruciating weight strapped to my back. A book, I answered. Malatrice bobbed her head, as did the snake, and then she folded her hands out in front of her. The other 4 hands remained tucked still behind her back. The beads on her collar twinkled gently, and then she gave me the final question. I swallowed, more nervous for this than for the unknown riddle. The answer provided by Mr. Morningside was wrong. I felt sure of that, but I was not at all convinced that I had the right clue. Or perhaps I had been confident, but now, faced with that hungry little eel around her neck, I wanted very much to be right and keep my fingers. With another vicious smile, Malatrice offered the final test. Arms to embrace, yet no hands. Pinches to give, yet no fingers. Poison to wield, yet no needle. What am I? I couldn't help it. I glanced at Dalton, who had abandoned his casual posture, watching me with his fingernails between his lips. His eyes were hidden, of course, but I knew all of his thoughts, all of his prayers were bent toward me. The demon focula had failed. Henry had never gotten the opportunity, but still I summoned the courage to believe in my own wits. For I did not know the word for an ancient scorpion creature with the chest and head of a man, but Father did. He spoke the ancient language of Kent, of Ara, of every tree and insect and man. No language escaped him. I shook, fearing what it might do to use his knowledge, but I wasn't going to lose my fingers. Gertablil, I said, my voice ringing out, all my hopes going with it. Chapter 24. Every inch of me froze with fear. I watched the snake, waiting for it to strike. Mother's grip on my hand tightened and then relaxed, and Malatrice squinted as if seeing me anew. Willing hearts. Immortal hearts. She extended all 6 of her golden hands to us. Wise hearts. You have passed the first trial, but further tests await you within. I will be personally interested to see how you fare, little one. The door is open to you. All that remains is to walk through it. A hard, cold wind blew through the ruins, and a moment later I heard a rustle of wings. Malatrice had begun to walk back down the ramp, but we were no longer alone in the castle. I turned, tucking my hands protectively over the straps of the pack, finding that the shepherd had come, and Finch, proving Kent's suspicions that our absence was noticed. Go through that door if you must, child, the shepherd said, hobbling toward me with a cane, his blind eyes finding me easily. But you will not take that book with you. Finch rushed toward me, the gold of his body fading as he reverted to his human form. He was not to reach me, as Kent stepped between us, his lip curling into a snarl. Looser, please, Finch implored, his huge, brown eyes wet with tears searching me out over Kent's shoulder. You don't know what you're doing. We were friends once, and though different, you always showed me kindness. Would you see us all killed? There's more to this than you know, I told him. I'm sorry, it's too late, I won't be persuaded. How did you find us? Dalton stepped up next to Kent, and I began backing away, knowing I may soon need to run and run swiftly. Oh, brother, I can sense you. I can always sense you. You may have turned away from us, but that does not mean our bond is broken, Finch told him, shaking his head of dark hair and glancing away, disgusted. I knew you were changed, but to take the book to work for him. Guilt and doubt tugged at the edges of my mind, but not for long. The sharp sting of a headache seared across my forehead, and I gasped, nearly felled by the pain. Sometimes I could feel Father's influence building gradually, but this came on with the quickness of a summer lightning storm. Father had sensed the shepherd's proximity and clawed his way through my mind until I could hardly hear a word being said around me. Let me face him, let me rend him with teeth and claw. Mother's hands curled around my shoulders, urging me away from the arguing. We stumbled toward the ramp, fragments of the shouting breaking through the bloody mist filling my head. It isn't for me, Dalton was saying. It's for everyone. You have them cornered, your entire host against a handful of children. This isn't a war, it's another massacre. Henry's released those souls, his strength is spent. What more do you want? To live, brother, and to punish you for killing my sister. But that was me. More bickering, more dark laughter from the corrupted recesses of my mind. The ground sloped, and I let Mother guide me, finding my feet as we descended the ramp. I won't let her take it, Finch was screaming now, all pretense of civility gone, and I heard a deafening clash of steel. You turned away from us, brother. You've diminished. I will take no pleasure in defeating you, but I will defeat you. Lucer, please, she's getting away. We shall spare your friends, Lucer, if you only listen to us. Listen to reason. They are feeble, alone. Let us end this, daughter, let us have our revenge. I gritted my teeth. No. Not now. Not when we were so close. Kent, I managed to whisper. The moon. I see it. Go, Aichu, go, we will not let them advance. But I leaned hard against Mother, hissing. It was wrong to go, to leave them like that, to let others fight my battles. And yet I feared what would happen if I stayed, if Father emerged and used me for his ancient revenge. I blinked hard, concentrating on Mother's presence, hoping that if I stayed near to her his influence would fade away. It did, but only a little, and I had time to open my eyes and see her and Kent staring down into my face with twin expressions of concern. How could I leave 100 possibilities flashed before my eyes, none of them encouraging? What if we emerged from the tomb to find Kent slain? What if I might have bargained for mercy and found some way to save us all and those bleeding and dying for us at Cold Thistle House? What if it was all for nothing? Go, Kent said again, pressing his hand between my shoulder blades, and take my courage when you do. Dalton flared gold behind him, wielding a staff with blades flashing on both ends. He blazed like fire, and through the flames I could see the shepherd advancing toward us, the kindness of his face wiped clean by rage. As Kent turned away from me, I saw the first ripples of tension beneath his arms, a spray of grey fur clustering at his nape as he took his power from the moon and came to our defense. Malatrice was almost at the door. It was time to go, time to carry the weight of the book down the ramp and into the tomb beyond. Even with Mother there, my skin prickled with cold. We were entering a tomb, after all, and a whispering voice of dread reminded me that only the dead belonged in such places. Willing hearts. Wise hearts. Immortal hearts. God help me, I did not feel so immortal anymore. Amazed, relieved, I stepped through the door and into my dream. No, not a dream this time, but the place itself. Another realm. I had seen the realm of one binder, but this was something else completely, not just a void of nothingness and impenetrable shadows. An incredible vision, so otherworldly that no simple mortal could be meant to see it, and I stopped short, gazing up at the endless glass hall of stars and night, standing in a tunnel with no walls but infinite constellations rotating slowly around it. Yet I was there. Not a simple mortal, perhaps, but a reluctant god-bearer that still felt like a serving maid. I've been here before, I whispered. Malatrice continued through the corridor at her unwaveringly languid pace. Many dream of the Hall of Gods and Glass. Few ever see it with true eyes. How many have come before, I murmured. We at last seemed to have found something that amazed Mother. She, too, cast her eyes in every direction, reaching out for a walled boundary that was not there. Yet her fingers touched something solid, even if it could not be seen. Acartha the Seeking, Romulus the Founder, Megwin, Hereward, Valens, Notchly the Thorned, Inu, Owain. Malatrice had tucked her second and third pair of arms back behind her shoulders again and gestured to us with her right hand. The snake around her neck appeared to be sleeping. Now your names will be added to that list. And how many of them escaped the tomb alive, I asked. The corridor was endless, but Malatrice led us forward, more constellations sparking to life above and below. Oh, she replied lightly. None. We followed Malatrice 5 paces behind, and already I felt weary from carrying the white book. It was heavier than I could have imagined, and my back ached. Mother glided along beside me, her veil long since removed, and she touched my shoulder. Shall I carry it? She asked. No, I think I should be the one to do it. This is my wretched mess, I said. Do you think this is what Mr. Morningside wanted to trap us in here forever? She considered that with pursed lips, then glanced ahead to Malatrice. It certainly would make life easier for him, wouldn't it, if we destroy the book? Then that's the shepherd sorted, and if we never leave this place, then he has all of England to himself. I thought of the instructions, the word scorpion standing out in my mind as if it had been written in fire. He gave me the wrong answer to one of the riddles, Mother. I don't think he really knew what he was sending us into. He must have suspected this might be where we meet our end. My heart sank. I had never really trusted him, but I had hoped at least that my terms were fair enough to tempt him into decency. But even that was beyond him. I had helped him against the shepherd, against father, and for what now he had trapped us in the tomb of ancients, a place nobody had survived. Could he have known that, too? We have to get out of here, I murmured. If only to throw it in his horrid face. The Dark One has shown kindness to you before. Yes, perhaps there is more here that we cannot see. Her optimism deepened my despair. Mother was ancient and wise, but I had known Mr. Morningside long enough to understand that his motives were always selfish. He had led Dalton and Mrs. Hallam to the tomb's entrance once, content enough to put them in the worst kind of danger for his own plot. If that was how he treated friends, what would he be willing to do to me? The hall stretched on and on, but I could not concentrate on its beauty. Panic rose in my chest. I looked behind us, but there was no door. Courage. There were trials to come, and the promise of death to face, but I needed to find a way to take that knotted ball of panic and transform it into determination. I was a changeling, after all. Such a feat ought to be possible. Above all, I wanted to see Mary, Kent, Chidioke, Lee, and Poppy again. And I wanted answers, real ones, from Mr. Morningside. I would get the answers I sought, no matter what I needed to endure. How very like Mr. Morningside himself. I noted a gradual slope to the floor now, a descent that grew steeper as we went. The Hall of Gods and Glass was conspicuously absent of scent. Not even dust touched this place. Where are we? I asked Malatrice as we went. Certainly not Yorkshire. I heard the amusement in her voice as we went deeper and deeper into the tomb. We are nowhere, suspended in time. There is no description I could offer that would tell you where we are. We simply are here. But it is possible to return, I pressed. If we pass your tests, I mean. It is possible. Difficult. But possible. The corridor turned and twisted, still leading us down. Above, below, and all around us, the constellations began to fade, the tunnel becoming solid black and then, brick by brick, embossed yellow brick. A carpet spread out under our feet, narrow and blue, running along the floor of that same embellished brickwork. This place did smell. I knew the odour well and drank deep of it, the comforting scent of parchment, old ink, and leather reminding me at once of Cadwallader's. Books. Of course. We had entered a library of sorts, though it had no end. Instead of books in shelves lining the walls, there stood innumerable cases made of glass. I slowed and veered to the right, approaching one of the cases. No, not a case, a sarcophagus. A body was suspended within, eyes closed, floating, seemingly asleep. It was a beautiful dark-skinned woman with long hair and feathery wings for arms. The next case held a man so wide and muscular he seemed almost to burst from the sparkling glass confines. My hand smoothed across the glass, but the figure within did not wake. "What are they?" I breathed. Mother stared at my hand and then at the man entombed beyond it, her 8 eyes filling with tears. "Gods," she answered, "for Malatrice. Ancients. Those that came before and were made to surrender. Some have yet to be," Malatrice added. "Many decided to return here to sleep. This is where I was born." Mother walked to an empty tomb, spreading her palms across it. There were other cases like it, abandoned or waiting to be filled. "I have memories of this place. I have dreamt of it too. That's why I could see it," I said. "Because Father remembered it." The library, rectangular but with a ceiling so tall it simply became darkness, stretched on and on, perhaps into eternity. This place, as she had said, existed out of time. I felt compelled to speak only in a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the slumber of so many dreamers. Mother began to cry, and I went to her side, ignoring the pain of carrying the book, to wrap an arm around her waist in comfort. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I should not have brought you to this place." "No," she said, smiling through her tears. "It is beautiful to see it again. When you have had your fill, you may approach the binder," Malatrice announced, standing apart from us and petting her snake. "Time is meaningless here, and I am in no rush to watch you die. If you have made it this far, you deserve to mark the tomb's splendor." And mark it I did, wandering down the endless line of coffins to see the array of gods and goddesses within, all unique but for the peaceful, blank expression they shared. Mother remained slumped against her own empty case, and my curiosity soon curdled as my feet brushed something brittle on the ground. Bones. I had stepped directly onto a skeleton, its arm turning to dust under my foot. "But I thought one had to be immortal to enter," I whispered, jumping back in horror. It was not my intent to desecrate the dead, and the empty sockets of the fallen skull stared at me accusingly. "To have known death and returned." "There are many ways to taste death," Malatrice replied. "You two are the first truly immortal beings to enter the tomb." The bones had shaken me, and I stumbled back toward Mother, hefting the pack higher on my shoulders before turning to Malatrice. "Mother, I know you are overcome, but I must hurry. My friends are in danger." "Of course," Mother said, pressing her forehead to the glass sarcophagus. "Of course. Go on, let us see this binder." I returned to Malatrice, a lump in my throat. Now I needed all of my courage. I had met a binder before, and every inch of me recoiled at the thought of seeing another. The thing had brought me only pain and torment, but then it had also given Mother back to us. And my purpose in the tomb was not to admire all the gods that had been and could be, but to destroy the White Book and earn the ritual that would sever Father from me for good. "Tell me, then," I said to Malatrice, with great trepidation but also great urgency, for time might not have had meaning in this place, but it undoubtedly did in Yorkshire. I watched her cat eyes dance with excitement. "Tell me what comes next." "I came to unmake the White Book, and then I will be leaving this place." "The binder comes," she hissed, showing me her demon smile. "The unbinding begins. You will ask of it 1 boon, it will take from you 2. You ask of it 2 favors, it will require 3. Choose your words carefully, little one. Nothing in this place is free." Chapter 25. Once delinquent as usual at my old school, Pitney, I had sneaked out of my bed to enjoy the pleasure of nighttime solitude. To be at a boarding school was to endure constant noise. Even when the candles were snuffed out and we were put to bed, somebody snored or coughed through the night, and I, ever a light sleeper, would spend another restless spell counting the days until our lessons broke and we received a brief respite. Not that anyone would visit me or that I would be allowed to leave. My grandparents wanted nothing to do with me, thinking me a broken bird with a wing that never mended. That injured wing, naturally, being my contrary nature, my strange black eyes, and my bothersome habit of speaking my mind. But still, when those days arrived, I might spend all my ungoverned hours hiding up a tree with a book, and then throwing rocks at squirrels with my one friend, Jenny. Her family never visited or invited her home, either, her father gambling away their money, her mother ever abed with some real or invented frailness. And so, desperate for those easier days, but knowing they were far off, I tiptoed past the sleeping teachers at the door that night, over the threadbare carpets, down one set of stairs, and across the left side of the second-floor gallery to the library. Nobody thought to guard the library, since the dozing sentries outside the bunk room were considered vigilance enough. The wood floors of the library were icy cold on my bare feet. Francine Musgrove, the person, at the time, whom I considered the worst person in England, had stolen my socks and hidden them in a chamber pot. Nothing, not even warmth, was worth the price of fishing around in someone's piss bucket. The books, however, the lovely, lovely books, and the quiet banished the misery of the cold. I found a nook near the window and read by moonlight, rousing myself with pinches so as not to be caught sleeping there come morning. Now I stood once again in a darkened library, and I felt strangely similar, cold, alone, delinquent, choosing to put myself in a place where I did not belong. God, I thought, blinded for a moment as all the light in the tomb of ancients went out. What would Jenny think of me now my greatest adversary was no longer Francine Musgrove and her penchant for thieving my undergarments? My adversaries were gods, creatures of ancient myth, vengeful spirits, and the unquestionably evil thing descending from the ceiling now. I shivered, realizing that it had been hovering in the darkness all along, watching us, waiting. Even Francine Musgrove did not deserve to be faced with this. Instinctively, I reached for Mother's hand. She watched the binder drift down toward us with narrowed eyes. The fine purple hairs on her arms stood on end, and she whispered something, a prayer, in a language far older than English, the true language of the dark fae. This binder looked nothing like the last. Indeed, it was hard to consider it one thing at all, for it was primarily a collection of arms, each dangling from the end of a glistening string. I did not need to step closer to know those strings were living, more like tendons than twine. The hands at the ends of those arms, perhaps 30 in all, held quills and inkpots, blotters and pouches of sand, wax brands, and various jars filled with coloured liquids, most too thick to be ink. One hand juggled a pair of dice, one cube red and the other black, each side mottled and carved with odd symbols. And at the centre of this pale and fleshy array hung an overlarge head, attached to a withering white torso. The binder had no legs, and it appeared sexless. It was bulbous and smooth, the colour and quality of an egg. Its odd, round body, floating amid the detached arms, gave it the vague appearance of an insect with many legs, yet it defied even that comparison, for its body was at least the size of a wagon. The only resemblance it bore to the other binder was its slit-like nostrils and unsteady mouth, which flapped and jostled as it floated there above us. This one carries two of my creations. Its voice reminded me of a workman who drank in the alley outside my childhood home. Buoyant, nasal, jolly. But then he had gone on to stab his wife in a drunken rage, so maybe not so jolly after all. The white book, I said, dredging up my voice from a chest fluttering with fear. I would see it destroyed. I removed the pack from my shoulders and dropped it. Malatrice swooped out of the darkness and took it up, then carried it closer to the binder. The binder's face careened toward mine, so close it shocked the breath out of me. I gasped and closed my eyes, then forced myself to open them slowly. Its loose mouth chewed, passing spittle from cheek to cheek as it studied me from an inch away. A mark upon this one's hand. The mark of a binder, it whispered. Yes, I met one of the 8 before, the one that binds souls. Then this one has met 6. I am 7. It gradually eased away from me, and one of its arms dropped down on its sinew to fish the white book out of the bag. Then it looked back at me. And what of the book inside this one? What is to be done? Wringing my hands, I looked up at Mother, who nodded gently. You carry it, Louisa. It is yours to do with as you please. I would not be myself if I imposed my will. But it's part of you, too, I said. It's the only reason they gave me Father's soul, to keep the Book of the Dark Fae from being lost. 7 had grabbed the white book and begun flipping through it, one disembodied hand holding the spine while another floated down to flick the pages. I cleared my throat. Malatrice said I should choose my requests carefully. So I am. I only want the white book to be destroyed, and then we should like very much to leave. 7 laughed at that, again reminding me of a drunk. It swayed as it laughed, bumping into several of its arms. To leave. Yes, good. To leave. Then this one will have what she asks, but only after I receive my due. 2 boons. I had no doubt the cost would be steep, and I braced to hear it, thinking of the pile of crumbling bones in the corner. Balance or chaos, balance or chaos. The binder's pale hand holding the dice began to shake them, and I gulped, but I had no idea which outcome to hope for. All of its other arms went still as the hand threw the dice, the 2 little squares landing directly in front of me, held aloft by some unseen force. They both landed to display tiny scale symbols. Balance. The white book is unwritten. The hand paging through the book glided away. Another, holding a black quill, took its place and began tracing over the words. As each illegible letter was written over, it vanished from the parchment. Story becomes memory. Memory becomes rumor. Rumor becomes legend. Legend fades. It hurt unexpectedly to watch the book being undone. With each disappearing word, I thought of an upworlder going with it. Their lives, their very essence, erased from the world. And I thought of Dalton, whom I had come to admire, and the sad longing in his voice when Head insisted I destroy the book. There will be no one left to blame when I'm gone. Perhaps that wasn't true. Perhaps there would be someone quite obvious to blame. Me. Or Mr. Morning sighed, as it was at his request that I had come. My heart filled with regret and my eyes with tears. The choice could not be made, but I wondered if I might have been strong enough to live with Father's influence, to run far, far away up a mountain, to the depths of a desert, and find some way to quiet his voice. Now I would be left trusting the devil in the world to remove the devil inside, and all of his mistakes and his lies told me I had erred when I chose sides. I peered into the darkness. Somewhere an empty case waited, and soon it would hold the shepherd. Would another soon hold Father, who was uncharacteristically passive while the white book was wiped clean? Perhaps, finally, I had done something to win his approval. 7 closed its round black eyes, quiet and thoughtful, mouth slack as the binder swayed back and forth. I glanced at Malatrice after minutes of this strange silence. Had the binder? Had it gone to sleep? What happens now? I asked, clearing my throat. The unbinding will take time, and the binder must choose your sacrifices. Sacrifices. We had travelled the windy road from boon to favour to sacrifice. Not that I was unduly surprised a wrong answer to a riddle lost a finger. This was not a place of light conversation and idle threats. Sacrifices, Mother asked. She apparently shared my unease. Malatrice moved across the single pool of light remaining in the tomb, reaching out to touch my cheek. I recoiled and she chuckled. What do you think the binder uses to make the book's air and wishes? Naturally the thorn provided the leather for your book, though it may now reside in living flesh. Malatrice took great pleasure in my horrified look, that much was obvious. Her chuckle drew out into a laugh, and she regarded her pet snake with a tilt of her head, chucking the thing under its head. She found the gate at the mouth of 3 rivers and brought her pretty bird inside. Willing, wise, she tasted death in disease, but a shaman cured her before she went to the true night. Notchly brought her pretty bird inside the tomb, and when the binder commanded she kill it, she refused. Barbaric, I whispered. Why the bird? What could it possibly have done? The binder continued its work and its contemplation. Malatrice glanced up from the snake, sneering. It was a truly awful bird. I could tell it didn't like nearer. I stoppered the ugly things I wanted to say about that. If the doorkeeper could look into her heart and divine its willingness, perhaps she could also sense my dislike for her pet. The binder worked faster now, pages flying, the words disappearing so quickly the quill seemed only a blur. We waited for 7 to make its decision, and each passing moment filled me with greater anxiety. My palms were slick with sweat. I could hardly bear to stand still, knowing some impossible pronouncement was soon to be made. I scrubbed my face with both hands and sighed, wanting the whole ordeal to be over at last, wanting to at least know what I must do to escape the tomb of ancients. All of this over a silly book, I said. Malatrice jerked her head up at that, scowling. The binders make the world, the binders make the books make the gods. Would that not make the binders the gods? I murmured. Mother brushed my hand. She was right. I was pressing this creature too hard and being foolish in my frustration and impatience. No, it makes them binders, and it makes you all but insignificant. 7 woke up. Its fathomless black eyes gazed down at us, glassy and momentarily unseeing. Then it seemed to find us, see us, and I took Mother's hand once more. She leaned her head toward mine, her soft pink hair touching my shoulder. Do not forget, she told me. Courage. The binder's voice boomed through the hall, echoing into the endless shadows around us. The mark on my hand burned and burned. Willing. But was I stared into the Morthanagod's eyes and hoped that it knew what I wanted. Mercy and the chance to see my friends outside the tomb once more. Had I not done enough? But then, could a thing like the creature before me care? This one's book will be bound again, 7 proclaimed, nodding toward me. I will claim this rebound book of the dark Fae, daughter of trees, and remake it with your very essence. Chapter 26. Father did not like that at all, for his spirit knew, just as I did, just as Mother did, that to remove him was to remove the one thing keeping me alive. Then something shifted, and with it my understanding, too. Father was no longer angry but excited. Elated. This ritual would take him from me, and without my body to hold him, give him the chance to be completely free. Resurrected. Whoever won, I lost. The binder had handed down a death sentence, and for a long, painful moment I could not breathe. Inside my mind, Father smiled. Then the screaming began. My screams. The first time Father overpowered my will, it had been a gradual thing, the slow creep of a negative thought twisted into something more dangerous. A thorn that became a barb that became a knife. The drip, drip, drip of confusion, of not knowing whether a thought was mine or his. First, I stopped taking my tea with cream and sugar until I began preferring a strong herbal brew that could only be found at one shop in the neighborhood. Then each tree began to have its own unique and alluring perfume, and insects, if I skewered them with a look, would retreat, leaving me in peace. And that was when it was all still manageable, when it felt not like being captive but like putting up with an odd relative come to stay. Needless to say, it had gotten worse. A single thought survived the heat now exploding through my skull. I had done the right thing, for whatever I could do to rip this monster from my mind was indeed what must be done. I felt my knees collide with the ground, and somewhere in the distance a cry from Mother. What a response to the binder's demands, though this was not my own. Father had waited, letting me grow comfortable, letting me lower my guard. And now head-struck with all his pent-up rage, not just red before my eyes but bright crimson and black spangles, and a steady sound like the drums of war pounding in my head, louder and louder, until I felt sure my eyes would pop and my teeth would slice through my tongue. Here it came, his wrath. I had worn a pin once, gifted to me by Mr. Morningside. I am wrath, it said. But I had never been this, never been the last desperate attempt at living by a god cornered into death. Was this what Kent and Dalton faced back outside the door? Did the shepherd sense his time was close and find terrible power and pain in his imminent end? Every word of the book inside of me was whispered by the binder at once, and though my eyes were no longer my own, I felt the searing in my fingers as they elongated into claws, felt the tightness in my skin, my legs, my arms, my spine, as the twisted deer of father's nightmares surged through me. Even Malatrice shouted something obscene and afraid in a language that was lost in the tongue I had used in the stranger's ritual at Cadwallader's and that was now branded into my palm. Do not whisper your elder speak before me, doorkeeper. The gods may sleep in your tomb, but you have never woken one to challenge it. Father's voice through my lips. He spread outward like smoke, and mother's warm hands fell on my arm, but father threw her off into the darkness. I cried out but was instantly silenced. He had pushed me to the bottom of the sea, and though I sensed a light high above me, no amount of thrashing and kicking brought me near the surface. I drowned in his black-blooded fury and tasted the sourness of revenge on my tongue. It was all he craved, blood and revenge, his spirit impervious to mother's pleas for understanding, for patience. You would rip me from this fleshling, and once I would have welcomed it, he roared, and his arm mine swiped with razor claws toward Malatrice. He was going to get us all killed. She has proven herself somewhat useful, but I can take many forms. You may unmake the white book, but you will never unmake me. I am the dark father of the trees, caller of night, the stag in the sky, and I will carry the book within me from this place, and I will not be stopped. Mother no longer pleaded with him, but with Malatrice. How long would they put up with this insubordination? Father had to be mad to think he could overpower those that had created him in the first place. I had read Dalton's diary, which meant had read it too. Only a madman would take such warnings, such violence, lightly. But yes, of course. Of course he was utterly, irredeemably mad. I see now. The binder spoke unperturbed. Intrigued. This one is not one but two. This, too, like all things, can be undone. Father roared, undeterred, and lashed out against Malatrice. She hissed as did her snake, the white serpent striking fast, batted away with a swift riposte from father, and then Malatrice unfurled all of her arms, moving lightning fast, dodging each swipe of claws until at last she managed to hook father by the arm. 1, then 2, then 3 hands clamped down, yanking him us hard to the ground. 2 will be 1, 7 said, more somber now. Father's panic, his pain, filled my head and flowed through my screams, tears pouring down my face as Malatrice twisted hard, snapping the bones. 2 will be 1, and from 1 emerges the book. A new book, a new beginning for the children of the Fae. And then we were floating, lifted into the air by 4 of the binder's pale hands. My arm throbbed hot with agony, but my thoughts and feelings gradually became my own. Then I would sense father again, as if a flimsy wall existed now between us, and he spent his remaining will, bashing against the barrier. No, please. Mother knelt below us, reaching up with both hands. It will kill her if you take his spirit. She will die. Then she will die. Malatrice whirled on her, brandishing her 6 powerful hands. The first time I died, it had been a quick thing. This was slow torture, the ripping of a fresh scab still hard-sealed to the skin. Father did not want to go, and he dug in, each of his deep and tearing claws removed with precision but not mercy. I began to feel cold, first in my feet and then in my hands. The iciness spread fast, like the first frost rushing to kill the last tenacious wildflowers of autumn. So, too, did my spirit cling on in father, resistant to the frost but not invincible. I heard his cries as my own, and for one brief instant I pitied us in equal measure. He had made me suffer in life, and now he made me suffer in death, but I felt his twin pain and wished it upon no one. Cold. So cold. A silvery puff of air left me, crystallizing with ice, and I watched it dance away toward the binder's smooth, white face. Was that my last breath? I did not think it would be so very cold. Balance. 7 did not cease its torture, tearing father's spirit from me steadily until it was a thing made real, a ghostly rendering of his form, skull, antlers, robes, and all. It floated apart from me, helpless, seeing its former home and reaching for it. One favor, 2 sacrifices. Balance, said the dice, and balance there will be. 1 book is unmade, another rebound. 1 creature undone, another reborn. 2 souls again in 1 body. The mother replaces the father. Wait. I tried to speak, but nothing happened. My voice was lost somewhere, spinning there in the darkness, trapped in father's soul. Wait, no, this isn't right. I couldn't know what exactly the binder meant, but how could it be kindness when all I knew of this place was pain? It was too late. 7 had made its decision. I saw a flash of understanding in Mother's 8 eyes, her arms still lifted in pleading and prayer, and then she, too, was hoisted into the air with us, held by the binder's unnaturally strong hands. Father's screams were unending, but I didn't look at him. I could only stare at Mother, hoping she could see in my dying eyes that this was not what I wanted, that none of this was balanced, that none of this was fair. Then Father's spirit thinned, turning slowly to smoke that was caught in one of the binder's jars, settling there to mix with some inky liquid within. A quill was dipped into the vessel, and a blank book was produced from the shadowy nothingness above us. At least, I thought, helpless and hurting, it would not be Mother's skin used to make that new cover, as it was already bound in something smooth and pale. Whose it was, I would never know, but I saw the beginning of the binding, of the writing Father's spirit, his knowledge of the dark Fey book, rewritten in his own essence. One of the thin, pale hands of the binder wrapped around Mother's neck and began to squeeze. I was frozen, dying, and soon she would be, too. Her arm stretched out toward me, her lips twisted in a lost, sad smile. I watched her tears disappear into the void around us and heard Malatrice cackle with satisfaction from somewhere beneath our feet. "Courage, Louisa, daughter," she whispered. "Your feet are on the path. I'll be going with you." Chapter 27. It did not feel as if my feet were on the path. I felt nothing. What a strange sensation, nothing. No pain and no fear, no understanding if I had become hot or cold, or if my body was scattered in a million pieces. Instead, I existed only in my mind, in a place, like the tomb, out of time. I was dead, that much I understood, or soon to be dead, suspended by the binder's will, not in my body and not yet laid to rest. When sound and light and feeling returned, it was all too much. I cried, as a baby must cry, forced through darkness and uncertainty, entering the world reluctant and confused. The place of not feeling or knowing was better than this. Here, back on the floor of the tomb of ancients, there was only more pain. Dust, the smell of wet leaves and earth, as if I had not been born but sprouted from the ground. My arm remained useless, broken, limp, and aching at my side. The binder waited above, Malatrice hovering close, and Mother, sprawled and empty on the stones, dead at the place of her birth. I pulled myself toward Mother, heedless of the binder, of its arms like slender white birds flying through the air as they prepared the new book and unwrote another. Mother looked as if she could be sleeping, with her lips slightly parted, as if the last breath pulled from her had been a sweet one. She didn't smile, but her eyes were closed, her hair pulled around her like a pillow of camellias. "After all that I did to save you, it wasn't enough," I whispered, finding that touching her hand did not give the same soothing comfort. "I failed you. I should never have brought you to this place. You were nothing but peace and light, no soul so undeserving." A shadow fell over us. "Malatrice, are you quite finished?" "Boo." Refusing to leave Mother's side, I twisted toward her on the floor, wincing as my injured arm took some of my weight, then collapsed. "I won't let you keep her body," I whispered fiercely, covering Mother with my arms. "It was not one of your demands." Malatrice glared down at me with her yellow eyes. One single scratch bled across her shoulder. Father's doing. Her snake had not suffered, still wound faithfully around her neck. "It would not be wise for you to return here, little one, no matter how great your need. I grow weary of your tone. What is this all for?" I sighed, lifting Mother's hand and clutching it. "The books, the gods, the binders. Why keep them here? Why not just give the world all of these creations?" It was not Malatrice who answered me but 7. I had not expected to be worthy of its notice now that it had passed judgment, but the egg-round head and soft white torso dipped low, regarding me with a curious smile. This one sees so much yet understands so little. Chaos, daughter of trees. Because chaos. The humans wonder. They squabble. They battle. Also amusing. And if the humans do it, why shouldn't the gods? It is one more game to watch, one more match to observe. Chaos and balance. I shook my head, outraged, knowing that many a wicked and wayward schoolgirl had proposed to me that there truly was no God above, and that all our mortal toiling was meaningless. But to hear it, plainly, from one that might actually know. So it's all a game, I murmured. You create the books, these gods, just to see which one will win. The binder stared at me as if I were simple and perhaps a bit pathetic. Well, yes, a game. My friends, the shepherd's people, father, mother, all of us bashing against one another just for your amusement. A voice within me said to be still. A voice within me said that nothing more could be done, that to die here would accomplish nothing. I held my tongue for one moment longer, then took a long breath and said, and if I refuse to play this hateful game? All the binder's free hands, perhaps 20 in total, spread wide. What this one does when it leaves this place is not for me to say, but I will watch this one. And here Seven smiled for the first time, and it shook me to my bones. I will watch this one with great interest. You will be disappointed, I said. The scribbling above us stopped. The quill rewriting our book had finished its task. It had all happened so quickly, but then, to these strange and otherworldly beings, our lives, our game was probably a play readily consumed. Our human lives, no doubt, passed but in the blink of an eye, and the eternal ones like the shepherd and Mr. Morningside warranted only marginally more attention. We cannot be killed, father had told me, only be made to surrender. Only. That was no longer true of me. I sensed not even the smallest trace of father's influence in my mind. I forced myself to think of the shepherd and about him. My feelings were blessedly my own. That was the one good thing to come of all this. Loss. I dragged myself up and watched as Malatrice accepted the finished book from Seven. She received it reverently enough, then placed it into the bag I had discarded. Returning to me, she waited until I offered my back and then slipped the shoulder straps over my arms, surprisingly cautious of my broken right arm. How will you take her from this place? She taunted, hissing in my ear, so close that I felt the beads of her collar brush my good arm. We do not waste a single part. You may leave her knowing she will resume her place in the world as a future book, as pages, as another story to tell. You will never see it, but she will not be wasted. You may take her spirit with you, but you cannot take her body from the tomb. You haven't the strength. Watch me. The book was not heavy this time, but light. I supposed that only the words of another or other gods weighted one down. Mother was still sprawled beneath the binder, and I turned from Malatrice, crouching and slipping one arm under her soft, feathered gown. It did not matter how difficult the burden, I would carry her back with me. Malatrice observed, then smiled as I gained my feet again, grunting, struggling, but still managing to slide Mother along with me as I approached the doorkeeper. She should be in that case, I spat. She should be at rest. Her eyes widened, the snake around her neck drawing back. She is at rest, little one. In you. I blinked. Like. Father was her whole mind and will was given to me, not just her spirit. I am sure you will hear her, Malatrice said with a nod, when she is ready to speak. Mother did not speak as Malatrice led me away from the single pool of light in the tomb, and she remained silent as the binder retreated to its nesting place, its body and legs receding into the deep shadows of the vast, perhaps endless top of the tomb. This had been a place of my dreams once, and with Mother within me, I wondered if I would see it again. I wondered if it would return only as a nightmare after all this. Mother remained silent as I limped along, dragging her body because I could not properly carry her. Over and over again I looked at her lips, realizing each time that they would be still. The tomb never brightened, but I sensed the sleeping forms of all those gods around us waiting to be pawns again in the binder's games. A door appeared, much like the one that we had entered through at the castle, but instead of blackness beyond there was the promise of something else. I saw green and sunlight, a hint of ancient stone. There was nothing to feel but persistence. Need. The way out lay before me. Mother had to come along, and no matter how long it took to drag her out, I would huff and sweat and grunt and struggle. She would not be fodder for another book. She deserved to have the sun's kiss and the field's embrace one more time. Malatrice waited next to the door, her head drawn back, chin high. She lifted one dark brown brow in expectation as I sidled toward freedom. Her snake, nearer, danced its head back and forth, sizing me up for a meal. Do not trouble yourself, I told her, sensing the cold, fresh air of our world. I will never come here again. I wouldn't be willing. She froze, but the snake darted forward, wrapping itself around me, Malatrice holding her tail while the snake squeezed, forcing the breath out of me. In my shock, Mother's body slid out of my grasp. You were the first to survive the dice and the binder in this place, Malatrice whispered, her eyes as cold as the void. She flashed her razor-sharp teeth. Maybe you should die instead. Maybe it would be better if nobody escaped, not even when fortune and fate have their way. Please. My hands wrapped around the snake, and I found Mother's strength pressing hard, digging my fingers into the soft, fleshy middle of the creature. Let me go, or your pet dies with me. Nearer. It was a call to attack. But I could attack, too, with what little strength I still possessed. I had come too far, lost too much, to give up on the threshold of survival. My hands crushed down before the snake could strike, and it gave a strangled hiss. Malatrice screamed in fury, and I felt the creature's grasp loosen around my neck. With the last of my breath, I pulled hard, flinging the broken snake at her mistress, crouching, grabbing Mother by the shoulders and dragging until every muscle screamed. The door was open only a crack, and it closed, slowly, but I forced us through, listening to Malatrice weep and curse as we landed on the other side, my last glimpse of the binder's realm, a mouth full of teeth and sorrow. I collected myself on the other side with a gasp, falling to my knees under the dead weight of Mother's body. At first, I was greeted with silence, then intermittent bird song, then a long, groaning harrow that I knew could belong only to a dog. That spurred me to my feet, and I ignored the blinding pain in my arm, staggering under my burden, taking one slow step after another away from the castle door. There was no ramp this time. I had simply been dumped out where I had begun, like so much unwanted refuse. A low sprawl of bodies lay across the courtyard, each more covered in blood than the last. Kent was closest to the door, lying in a heap, panting, lingering in his moon-touched form. But the moon was gone now. The sun returned once we emerged from the door. I watched the magic fade from him until he was but a man again, slashed with deep wounds, his eye and jaw badly bruised. Mother slid from my arms gently, and I joined him on the ground, pressing the blood-soaked fringe from his eyes and breathing a sigh of relief as he swore, spat blood, and slicked the sweat from his face. Did we win? He asked, head lolling back on his shoulders. In a fashion, I said at first. Then, no, not really. But stars, I'm so happy to see you alive. Me too, he teased, then twisted on his side. That one was about to finish me off, Kent explained, pointing at Finch. But then, the book, I told him. It's gone. I cannot say what will happen to them now. Teu, they dropped all at once, he said. Like leaves floating one by one down to a river. He noticed me favoring my left arm and frowned, getting onto his knees and gingerly taking my right wrist. I hissed through my teeth, clamping a hand down on his shoulder. Broken. No idea what it looks like. Frankly, I'm not ready to see. We must find a physician then. Kent stood, shaky, and lifted me up by my waist. Or Mother could try to heal you, but she's gone, I finished. We had only a moment to look at her, for there was movement among the other bodies. Their need was more urgent, and I accepted Kent's help as he guided me over toward the 3 men flat in the dirt. "Did you do it?" Dalton gasped. He did not appear terribly hurt, but he clasped his chest, gulping air harder and harder, and it was clear he could not breathe. "Is it gone?" "I destroyed it. I'm so sorry, I don't know if it was right." I lowered myself next to him, and took the hand that he offered, letting him place it back on his fluttering chest. "You're dying. Now that it comes to it," he whispered. "I'm not afraid. Tell Henry. Tell him I was wrong. He can be more than he is." The still time. Blood trickled from his lips, and I reached under him to support his head. He wasn't finished, and I wasn't leaving until he had said all he wanted to say. "What was it like?" Dalton asked. The bandage had fallen away from his eyes, and I gently wiped the blood and perspiration from his forehead, looking down into the darkened red pits where his eyes had been. "Was it astounding?" "Yes," I nodded. "But terrible, too. I wish I could tell you all about it." "My dreams of it will be better," he said. "They always are. But this feeling, I think it's time for me to go now. I think I have no choice." I pressed my eyes shut and tried not to let it hurt so much. "I've killed you," I said. "I'm so sorry." "You saved your folk, gave them a chance," Dalton wheezed, a thick clot of blood dribbling down his chin. "That's what I wanted. We never let them have that before." "You will say goodbye to Fathom the safe house," he said at last. "I want it to be hers." A muddled groan came from behind us, and Dalton's head turned toward the sound. "Father." But there was no more. The last word pulled everything out of him. There were no eyes to stare or close, but I felt him go, felt the last shuddering breath that rustled the grass. Gently, I let his head fall back into the green carpet of the courtyard, and then laid the bandage once more over his face, folding his arms one at a time across his chest. Mother had not spoken until then, but her spirit whispered to me now. One kiss to the moon, one bow to the sun, a gift of flowers to where the wild deer run. That is all that is asked when our day is done. I repeated the prayer to Dalton, knowing it was what Mother had used to send restless souls to their repose. And then it seemed the wind took him, and all at once he was a riot of yellow butterflies and light. Chapter 28. A wren fell out of the nest once outside my dormitory window at Pitney. Jenny and I puzzled over what to make of it, neglecting our mandatory exercises. Neither of us cared much for taking turns about the lawn to keep the bloom in our cheeks, and so instead we hid behind a solid oak and debated what to do with the dazed bird. "We could knock it on the head and put it in Francine's bed," Jenny suggested. It was creative but none the less cruel. To the bird, obviously. Francine could go soak. "I'm not sure I can bring myself to kill it. The nest is awfully high. We might fall and break a leg trying to put it back." Jenny was reasonable and creative. It was part of why I liked her and why we had become fast friends. Perhaps also we had become friends because we were the only 2 girls at Pitney who would spend time considering whether or not to shove dead birds into a rival's bedclothes. Francine and the rest would never consider something so vulgar, but they had not grown up in the shit-stained slums. Their distant family still wanted them in some regard, and they simply awaited their return to place them as a governess or to offer them off to some random lad as marriage material. "If we leave it, then a fox will come," Jenny added. "But isn't that what would have happened if we had never found it?" I asked. I dropped the stick that might have been used as a tool of execution. The wren twitched, little feet kicking helplessly. "We never noticed the bird. The fox comes. The fox eats the bird. If we cannot decide anything productive, then I believe we should let nature take its course." Jenny presented no compelling alternative, and so we left the bird behind the tree and returned to our vigorous walking. The next day, alone, I looked behind the oak. Nothing remained but a tuft of feathers. The fox had found its meal, or the bird had regained itself and hopped away. I think I always knew the answer, but I told myself the wren escaped unscathed. The fallen wren lying before me today was not so lucky. The fox had found this bird, and I could only wonder if anything would remain of him after. I knelt next to the shepherd, amazed at his smallness. He was not a large man, but in dying he seemed to shrink more. His arms were very short, and his oversized flannels made him look childlike. Pitiable. Dark blood ran from his lips as I knelt beside him. Kent stood a ways off, perhaps aware that he was not invited to the exchange. Or perhaps he did not trust that our battle was truly over. "Are you the fox?" I murmured, watching as his milky eyes found me. "Or are you the wren? I took you in once, girl, and this is my reward," he sputtered. He coughed hard, and I fished the handkerchief out of his pocket, holding it to his stained lips. "Courtesy now, I shall never understand it." "You murdered my folk," I said. The words came easily, as if practiced. I blinked, gazing a little to the right of him. Something inside me felt warm and ready, perhaps what a mother experienced when she knew 'twas time the babe came. "You were the fox. We were but stunned birds. Now we are naught but a tuft of feathers." He shook his head slowly. "You aren't making sense, girl. You're mad. You've killed us because you are mad." The warmth in me spread up and out, but it was not troubling, quite the opposite. I didn't know what was happening, why I could feel so much at the sight of Dalton's death, and nothing at all as this weakened old man lay expiring on the ground. His worn grey cap had fallen off his balding head, and it lay in the mud. "I am the fox now, only when I make a meal of you and yours, there will be nothing left. Not a feather, not a foot, not a trace of you on the land or in the air. There you go," he sighed, hacking into the cloth I held to his mouth. "Sounding as damned crazed as your father. That's your problem, you have so much of your father in you, lass. It's put you down a path from which there's no hack return." The smile I gave him was sad, but perhaps vacant too. I took the handkerchief away and flattened it next to his head. The blood on it had made a pattern like a fallen leaf. "My father is all gone now," I told him. "Our book is rewritten. Our story starts anew. Father is nothing. I carry something else." Do you know, I watched his brow furrow, terror in his eyes even as they were filled with blindness. "Mother told me that what you and Henry did to us broke father, watching so many of his children die. It scorched his heart to ash. But I walked through the fire with her in the tomb of ancients, and the fire did not break us, it did not char us to dust. No, we walked through the fire and it forged us anew." He let his head fall back against his cap, though his mouth never closed. "I should have asked forgiveness for what we did. I should have made amends. I never thought this would be the way it ended. God help me. God help Henry. We're well beyond that," I said, watching his eyelids flutter and then close. I waited, thinking perhaps I should say the prayer Mother had gifted to me through her spirit. But then I thought better of it and stood. Finch, however, had tried to show me gentility once, and might have become a friend had things been otherwise. I held no real animosity toward him in my heart, and he looked almost frail, crumpled on the ground. He had already left, probably before I had even emerged from the tomb. I knelt and crossed his arms, closed his eyes with a soft touch of fingers, then spoke the words and watched him dissolve into wings and lift again high into the sky. Kent waited for me at the castle door, leaning against it, his wounds making him slump with fatigue, all the more because he had taken up Mother's body and now carried it across both shoulders. Together we left the ruins behind, walking in silence down the grassy hill to the road, where the carriage and horses waited to take us back to Coldthistle House. It would take time, I knew, for this new Darkwill in me to settle. But it was nothing like Father's influence, jarring and foreign. This new voice, new perspective, felt entwined with me naturally, as if it had been there all along, a dormant fire waiting to be stoked. Mother's spirit had changed when it became mine, and briefly I considered that, just like Father, she really was, in some sense, broken. That gave me pause, but then I sat with it, joining Kent in the driver's box, the wind harshly cool against my face as he took us back, and I decided that yes, Mother was broken. And so was I. So were we all. Death had changed her. Her peace had turned to passion, and now that Ada was mine to bear. If we had left the tomb unchanged, then why enter it at all? Our story was the only one to survive the tomb. I had looked into the face of the one that made us all and found only contempt, and I knew that I could not let my own folk, my own friends, look into my face and see the same. I would play the binder's sordid game of lives and loss, but I must change the rules. Mother taught me that. My dear friends taught me that too. How do you feel? Kent asks, his voice lost amid the thunder of hooves and whistling winds. I took the pack from my back and laid it across my lap as we chewed the ground, making haste back toward the mansion. I only feel hollow. Hollow. I had meant your arm, but very well. Yes, hollow. That is all right to be hollow. That can be filled up with hope. Or with grief. Grief. Hope. I puzzled over those words, then smiled into bracing cold. Instead I shall choose resolve. Chapter 29. 1247 Unknown. There are things best left unsaid in the hours after defeat. The heart is weaker in those hours when a vague sense of consequence becomes truth, becomes life. Henry has asked me to try once more to join as they travel east, following the jade caravans along the Silk Road. There are rumors, and there are always rumors, of a woman in Singen who has heard the remaining riddle. But I will not be going east. I will not be going anywhere. I cannot watch Ara bandage her eye once more while Henry writes obsessive notes and insists, first to himself, then to us, that this journey has only just begun. When I refused, he called me a coward, but this time it did not sting. Henry, if time or circumstance or some foolish trick of luck ever brings this diary into your possession, I would have you know something. There is, in fact, one more riddle, and it goes like this. What is a tree that needs the sun but bends and grows away from it? What is a flower that craves rain but only blooms in the desert? You can run to the ends of this world, Henry, search in every dusty corner, ask every passing merchant, and chase down every idle rumor, but you will not find what you seek. The answers to your questions are not in a hidden tomb or an ancient book, and while my sight dims as I turn away from Roe and my people, your sight failed a long time ago. Your riddle is not at the end of a long road. The riddle lay before you all this time. Why live, why go on, why choose creation over destruction? I am glad to leave the dog with you, because perhaps, dear friend, you will one day see it in his eyes. Why choose to go on? Because that which is unconditional is eternal. You were made to be eternal, and I love you for it, if only you loved yourself with my same true heart. As you travel east, I will go west. I think I will seek out poets and sit in their presence and listen to their sad rhymes, wondering always what cutting critique you would offer them. One day Roe will call me back to service, and I shall go, and I will lament over and over again that the request has not come from you. The house, not in turmoil but in silence, looked shattered against the fields. Not a single window remained intact, and the east tower, that closest to the border with the shepherd's property, had collapsed. When the carriage stopped and I was on the drive again, I at last felt the extent of the damage to my body. I was bruised in places I had never been bruised before. My arm vacillated between stinging needles and numbness. Kent lifted Mother's body out of the carriage proper and carried her along beside me as we circled back toward the site of the battle. Corpses littered the lawn, but not our friends. I wondered if they would stay there and rot, and I thought with weary resignation that it would fall to me to see them all on. It would do everyone good to see a display of butterflies after so much blood. Back Poppy, who had been resting on the ground with Bartholomew, jumped up and ran to us. But you are hurt, Louisa, and the Purple Lady, too. I saw no sign of Niles or Giles. Or Mr. Morningside and Mrs. Hallam, for that matter. Oh dear Mary, Lee, and Chidioke emerged from the kitchen at the sound of Poppy's shouts. They rushed over and helped Kent lay Mother down on an unstained patch of grass under the kitchen awning. Mary's eyes drifted to the bag on my back. It's our book, I told her. The shepherd is gone and the white book destroyed. They all dropped out of the sky the moment it happened, Chijoke said. His hands were burned from the rifle muzzle, and his shirt was stained with soot. I can't believe you did it, that it could even be done. I saw the place where the books are made, I explained. There were complications. To destroy the book, ours had to be remade, which meant my spirit had to be removed, which meant another soul was needed, Chijoke finished. It was his area of expertise, after all, and he bowed his head, sighing. That cannot have been easy. Easy, Mary cried. Look at her arm, we should get you inside, and Kent too. We can see to all your injuries and find you something to eat. Giles was badly wounded. He's upstairs with Fathom and his brother. I do so hope he survives. In a moment, I said. Only, is there something I could use to bind my arm up? It hurts to let it swing so. Chijoke patted Mary on the shoulder and then trotted into the kitchen. He returned shortly with 2 white sheets from the pantry and carefully lifted my arm, bracing it against my middle before using the sheets to wrap it and then swaddle me diagonally across the shoulders to keep it firmly in place. Thank you. Where is Mr. Morningside? Behind the house, Lee said, pointing. He stood straighter now that the Upwalders were no longer a problem. He took Mrs. Hallam behind the house. Walk with me and show me, I said. There was no rush now to deal with Mother's body, and I knew Mary and Chijoke would take good care of Kent and find something for his wounds. Finding Morningside was my most urgent task, and Lee's eyes widened in surprise at my suggestion, but he agreed, falling into step next to me as we picked our way across the hole-ridden ground and fallen Upwalders. I whistled and tapped my thigh with my good hand, and Bartholomew lifted his head, then heaved an immense doggy sigh and loped over to join us. Why him? Lee asked, reaching out to stroke the dog's head. You will see, I said. But first I must ask you something. We walked slowly, for we were both sapped from the fighting. His knuckles and forearms showed a boxer's welts, and with his strange, unnatural new strength I could easily imagine how he had made himself useful in the final push of the battle. We had come so very far from nervous flirting in the library. Something is changed about you, Lee observed. I suppose anybody would be changed after what you must have seen. It's more than that, I admitted. The walk was not long, but I took my time. As we rounded the house, I saw across the north lawn that Mr. Morningside was indeed there, and he was finishing building a pyre, stripped of his coat and down to his shirt sleeves. The sight of him doing menial labor was like watching a hedgehog dance a gavotte. Father is gone. Mother is with my spirit now. I'm still learning what that means, and I know you were not there to see what I became when Father took control. It was ugly, violent, wild in a way that frightened me. Mary told me something of it, Lee replied. I couldn't understand why you would make a deal with Mr. Morningside again, but she said it must be done. And she spoke truly. It had to be done. I paused then, watching Mr. Morningside carefully lift Mrs. Hallam's lifeless body onto the piled wood. She had given her all to protect the house, just like the others. It was a miracle she and Giles were the only casualties. Do you know, I once saw a farmer burning his field. I never understood why until now. He was cleaning away the useless stuff so that new and better plants might grow. That's how I feel now, Lee. Father was an inferno, unbridled, but Mother is quite different. This is a fire I want to set. A fire I can control. Lee stared at me, unblinking. Then, you're happy. I didn't say that. I offered him a thin smile and nodded toward the pyre. Mrs. Hallam is gone, but you're still here. Is her magic not needed to sustain you? He scratched his chin at that. A bit of whiskers had started to grow there. Chijoke thinks I might be tied more to the book than to her. I don't feel any different now that she is dead. Good, I said softly, thinking. That's good. Because I own the black book now, so you are in no near danger of disappearing. Chapter 30. Mr. Morningside had just lit the kindling beneath the pyre when Lee, Bartholomew, and I reached the clearing. He stood back from the crackle as it sparked, spread, and grew into a blaze. The flames leapt upward, chewing the two-wit wood that smoked, and sent a pillar of black smoke straight up into the air, as if signalling to some distant army. With arms crossed he watched as the fire neared Mrs. Hallam's still body. Without Dalton's diary, I might never have known how long they had been together, or how closely their lives were linked. I couldn't help thinking of what she had told me as the battle against the Upworlders raged around us, that she should have been firmer with him, as if she were a mother and not his devoted follower. Maybe, in a sense, she had been his guardian. And now, with all of his ancient friends gone, he was adrift, unanchored. We did not make a stealthy approach, and he twisted at the hips, perhaps simply expecting employees of the house. His whole manner changed when he saw me there with the dark fey book still strapped to my back. He dropped his arms and frowned, then smiled, then frowned again as I advanced. "I'm deeply sorry about Mrs. Hallam, about your friend," I said. "Me, too. She was a loyal companion to the end, and such a feature of my life that her demise seemed impossible." Mr. Morningside looked away and back into the fire. "But you've returned and the battle has ended, which means—" His brows lifted in anticipation. "Yes," I told him. "The white book is no more." "Then, it's over," he said, staring off into the forest. "It's over. I am sorry about your friends," I continued. "Or rather, I'm sorry that you lost them this way. That they tried to help you, believed you, and all along you were just using them. And I'm sorry about the house. I know it will be difficult for you to lose it." "Lose it," he repeated. It wasn't until that moment that Mr. Morningside took note of Lee's presence. He stepped away from the pyre and toward us, studying Lee with more interest, golden eyes aglow. "My dear Louisa, you haven't even given me the chance to fulfill my end of the deal. It will be more difficult, surely, with Mrs. Hallam gone, but not impossible." "Indeed. The contract, do you have it?" I asked, then continued on before he could answer. "There's no need. I remember the wording precisely. You were to remove Father's spirit from me. If that did not come to pass, then Cold Thistle House and the Black Albion would be mine." In his eagerness to respond, he smiled, then crooked one finger under his jaw and hesitated. "I'm sure you're just itching to explain your reasoning. You cannot remove what is already gone," I said, advancing on him. He looked startled, truly startled, and perhaps it was not until that moment that he realized how unlikely it was for me to have returned at all. Swallowing hard, he then also noticed Bartholomew. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but nothing came out. That was well enough, for I wasn't yet interested in what he had to say. He was at his most dangerous when he poured honeyed words into one's ears. "Mother is dead. All of the Upworlders are dead. And I would be dead too, were it not for luck and strange coincidence. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Centuries of planning and plotting, moving us the pieces in your little game with promises and lies. Now that we've come to the end of your game, will you answer a riddle for me, devil?" His lip curled into a sneer, and he glanced toward the pyre as if to shame me for causing a scene in front of the dead. "Go on. Arms to embrace, yet no hands. Pinches to give, yet no fingers. Poison to wield, yet no needle." I put my hand lightly on Bartholomew's furry head and scratched. "What am I?" Had I eyes that penetrated his skull, I might have seen all the wheels turning, all the quick calculations as he stewed over his answer. And were he a teakettle, steam would have clotted his ears, everything suddenly too hot. Mr. Morningside shifted his weight and crossed his arms again, tipping back his chin in an imperious manner that reminded me instantly of Malatrice. That didn't go in his favor, either. "A scorpion," he said. "Lying or inept, I hardly know if it matters any more." I nudged the giant shaggy dog at my side, snapping my fingers in Mr. Morningside's direction. "Go on, Bartholomew. Is he telling the truth? Does he really think that's the answer, or did he hope, secretly, that I would lose a finger for his error, that I would fail or die and become one less mess to sweep up?" "It isn't so, Louisa. If I told you something in error, it was not intentional. I wanted dearly for you to succeed. Bartholomew glanced up at me with his seeking eyes puppish, while Morningside snorted, then stumbled backward, his own gaze widening with shock as the dog leapt toward him. He knocked Mr. Morningside off his feet, startling all of us, and then crawled over his body, the stiffer fur along the dog's spine standing up, rigid. His lips peeled back, showing finger-length teeth, and his eyes, normally so sweet, had gone feral with purpose. "Louisa," I heard Lee murmur. "Just watch." This was when I would know. Mr. Morningside's scheme would be revealed, his plot to end Mother and me, including the unlikely but certainly not unwanted possibility of Dalton and all the other Upworlders being wiped completely away. No matter what, there would be fewer to stand against him. I saw Mr. Morningside paw lightly at the dog's shoulders, a small, whimpering sound escaping him before Bartholomew lunged forward and did nothing. The dog neither growled nor licked him. Bartholomew seemed only confused. Maybe it meant that there was no lie and no truth. That Mr. Morningside had not himself known what to expect when I approached the tomb. Satisfied, Mr. Morningside grunted. He shoved his way to his feet and brushed the fur off his trousers. "I told you what I knew, and you did what I could not. Would you indulge an old fool and describe what it all was like?" It was beauty and then sorrow, amazement and then pain. I pushed my hand through my snarled hair in frustration and winced, even that movement upsetting the other arm in its sling. Was I wrong about him? Had he sent me out in ignorance and not with malice in the end? It mattered less to me than the knowledge that he had waited until the last moment to sacrifice his beloved birds, long after his friends and employees had jumped in to defend the house. "You have no idea what you asked of me, what that place was." There were no answers there, only misery. I saw the place where the gods are born and where they go to sleep. I met a binder, and it ripped my soul in half, then used an innocent to repair what was wounded. I only survived because of what Dalton told me, because of what I read in his diary. I spun away, feeling the tears coming on, but the voice inside me, Mother's voice, emerged gently at first and then with an insistence that could not be ignored. "I'm sorry, Louisa." Mr. Morningside went quiet for a moment, and I could imagine him staring contemplatively into the flames. "I have no idea how you could stomach reading about us. The whole affair was, well, rather Byzantine, to be honest. My kind and his were never meant to mingle, for obvious reasons. Though I suppose I must be honest, you have me at a disadvantage, knowing, as you now do, my intimate secrets. It struck me as vain and sad that he would worry about such things when so many lives had been lost that day. You will find that I am the last soul likely to pass judgment," I assured him. "I can see, quite naturally, how one could fall hopelessly for Dalton. He was very genuine, nothing but accommodating." "Oh yes," he chuckled. "Dalton Spicer was certainly accommodating. He accommodated me right into his grave." I turned around to see that he was not looking at the fire, but at me. "We are all of us thralls to our better nature." "No, Mr. Morningside said dryly. "No, not all of us are, Louisa." Indeed, it was time to take what was owed, to move on, to bury Mother and find a place to start again. I had an idea for that, of course, or perhaps Mother did. "Indeed. Well, then you will not be surprised when I ask for the house and the book. You did not remove Father's spirit from me, and thus I want what was promised." Lee shifted uncomfortably, and Bartholomew padded over to him, nuzzling into the young man's hip. Mr. Morningside laughed again and smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You cannot be serious, Louisa. It was I who sent you into that place, so in essence I was responsible for." "Do I look to be in a bargaining mood?" It came out in a deadly whisper, one that snatched his smile away handily. "I would sincerely advise against taking full responsibility for what occurred in that tomb. You who sees all ends and plans for all possibilities, even you could not prepare for what I learned, what I endured. And I doubt you could have survived it. am already feeling rather irritable, and you will hear now the extent of my mercy." He stared back at me, fuming, his hands falling to his sides where they balled into fists. "Louisa." The sound of a coughing fit drew my attention, and I turned briefly to see that its source was Poppy. We had amassed an audience, the remainder of the house staff as well as Kent and Fathom having gathered to watch us from a safe distance. I whirled back to face Mr. Morningside. "You will abandon this place, and it will be torn down," I said, nodding toward the house. "I don't want it. Nobody should want it. As for the book," turning to Lee, I softened my tone, for he was innocent in all of this. "Lee, should you like to go on living as you are?" "I believe so, yes. Yes, I should like to go on, even if it is a strange new existence." "Then keep your book," I said to Morningside. "But you will tear one page from it, and it will go to Lee. What he does with it, where he takes it, will be his business. If the book's power has sustained so many residents over the years, then a page should prove more than enough." I hooked my arm through Lee's and coaxed him away from the pyre. The wood had started to burn in earnest, igniting Mrs. Haylam's stained frock and the bandages I had tied over her arms and legs. The black smoke funneled into the air, forming a cloud that hung heavy over Cold Thistle House. "And me, Mr. Morningside called after me. He sounded ragged, desperate. "What becomes of me?" I spared him a single glance over my shoulder. "I never want to see you again." Chapter 31. We buried Mother's body at sunset in a hollowed-out cave beneath the house. I hoped that when the mansion was torn down, her roots and branches would spread through the foundation and become something lovely on the site of so much pain. I left Mr. Morningside the diary, placing it just outside the green door in the foyer, the one that marked the entrance to his subterranean domain. Inside the cover, I had inscribed Dalton's final message for him. "Tell him I was wrong. He can be more than he is. There's still time. What will you do now?" Lee had finished packing his things, which fit neatly into the small case he had arrived with when he came to Cold Thistle House with his uncle. We stood outside in the late autumn air, the day after the battle. Chidioke and Fathom worked to load Giles' body, wrapped tightly in a sheet, into the wagon that would carry Niles back to Derridon. The undertaker had not survived the night, and a somber, still mood had fallen upon the house. Nobody spoke in tones above a whisper. No meals were served. We found our tea and sustenance on our own and ate in silence, for nobody knew quite what to say. "I thought I might go home," Lee said, sitting down on the grey stone stoop. The spoon necklace had been tucked under his shirt, and he wore a fine coat that he had saved from his initial travel to Yorkshire. "Things will feel much different there, now that I am, well, as I am. But more than that," he looked into the middle distance and breathed deep, "now that I know that I was not the cause of my guardian's death, it might be easier to be at peace. Oh, I don't know. I've been in this strange new form for so long now, it will be difficult to be only among normal humans again. I have no idea if I can inherit any more, but I should like very much to see my family again. It won't be easy," I told him. "I never really found my way in London. When you've seen all that we have seen, the mundane world begins to lose its shine. I hope you fare better than I did, and I hope your family accepts you just as you are." Family. The word did indeed have its draw. I gazed around at the assembled friends and former colleagues who had all changed into shawls and cloaks for travel. Nobody fancied staying any longer at Cold Thistle House, not when it was empty and even more dreary, the windows blown out, the turrets crooked and charred. No more residents prowled the corridors. No more birdsong greeted one when dawn came. "You know you are more than welcome to join us," I told him. I had bathed and changed into a simple black frock, one of my old uniforms, but chose to keep the pack with the remade book close to me at all times. It felt like a talisman, or perhaps a charge. It will be a long ride north, but there are places to stop along the way. Might be a pleasant ride, you know, if taken with friends. Lee nodded, his blonde curls bouncing, and he gave me a good-natured smirk. Will the post reach you if I try to write? Perhaps when I have had my fill of family I can come and see what your world is like. There will always be room for you, I said, pressing his hand. And about the post? Well, why don't you put down your address, and I will see what can be done about it. Chuckling, Lee dug into his bag, bringing out a bit of parchment. Inside, I saw a flash of yellowed paper, rolled up. The page from the Black Albion. He would need it with him always, but at least it would allow him some sense of freedom. There you are. He stood, handing me the slip of parchment. Now it looks like they are ready to depart. I thought I should go with Niles as far as Derriden, and from there I will find my way home. We clasped hands, and then he pulled me into an embrace, mindful of my arm. But I knew it would not be the last time we met. I longed for him to see home, as I had never imagined it might happen again, but he was now a creature of shadow and magic, and one day he would need a place where that was not shocking at all. Standing on the stoop, I watched as he said his goodbyes to the others, then climbed into the wagon with Niles. The two men turned in the driver's box and waved, and my heart clenched a little in loss or regret as they rumbled out of the drive, making their way to different homes, both shrouded in sadness. And I followed the rut of the wheel left in the gravel, tracing it to Fathom, who watched the wagon disappear with one hand tucked above her eyes just under her dashing tricorn hat. Will you be accompanying us or taking up the safe house in Dipford? I asked. Neither. Fathom shook her head, picking thoughtfully at a bandage on her hand. Of all of us, she seemed to have escaped the battle mostly unscathed, which was quite the feat for a human. I'm off, I think. Somewhere far. Too many memories back in Dipford. Too raw. I have a friend in Massachusetts, Lucy, whom I should look in on. She'll put up with me for a while, at least. She chuckled and knocked me gently on the good shoulder. Come see America, Louisa. Plenty of spooky nonsense there, and I don't just mean the politics. She had procured a horse from the stables, and she jumped up onto it with practiced ease. I'm sorry for what happened to Dalton, I told her, glancing away. He spoke fondly of you at the end. Fathom gave another bawdy laugh and tipped her hat to me, wrangling the horse toward the road. Of course he did. Crazy Ginger always did have a thing for me. And he was one of the rare good ones. The good ones don't last long in this world, and he lasted longer than most. Living in that safe house, I saw a lot of folks come and go, but Dalton was always there, always dependable. It just wouldn't be the same there now that he's on his own adventure. With that, she was gone, dust covering her departure as she sped out of the drive and south toward distant London. And there was, of course, the looming question of where Poppy, Mary, and Chidiock would go. Bartholomew would follow wherever the little girl went, and they, along with Kent, waited expectantly by the final two carriages, one riddled with holes from the Tarasque, the other the light and fast-feet Niles and Dalton had driven up from St. Albans. Your packs, I said with some surprise, finding that while I'd said goodbye to Lee and Fathom, Mary had carried out a number of overstuffed bags, including one filled with silver and trinkets, no doubt to sell. I had considered that they might want to join me, but after so many broken families, I never allowed myself to truly believe it. I thought. I had no idea how to even begin. But in the spring, when I bargained for your contracts to be severed, well, I thought you all wanted to stay. We did. Then. Chidiock took Mary's hand and picked up one of the bags. There isn't anything left for us here, and Mr. Morning sighed. Well, he almost got us all killed, and I might not love the Upwilders, but it was ugly business. If he thought he could make us fight his battles for him and do his bidding forever, then he had things seriously twisted around. I don't want to stay here another minute and watch him put you or Mary in danger again. And you're right, Mary added with a sheepish smile. With how hard it's all been, we thought it best to stick together. Family-like, you see. We're all eager to be away from here. Poppy nodded, but then seemed to change her mind, glancing back at the house. She frowned and marched up to me, tugging hard on my skirts. Bartholomew comes, too he comes with, or I won't go at all. The dog howled in agreement. Of course, I said, tossing Kent a glance. Canines are welcome in this family. Kent rolled his eyes, grabbing 2 of the packed cases and taking them toward the larger carriage. I am much cleaner than that thing, and better behaved. But this is what you want? I asked again, looking at each of them in turn. It will be a long road north, and I have no idea what to expect when we reach the first city. This was never how I thought it would go. That makes 5 of us, Mary said with a sigh. 6, Poppy insisted, grabbing Bartholomew by the ear. That seemed to settle it. We would all go north together and find what we could find along the way to the first city. There was room enough for us all in the carriages, and Chijioke knew the surrounding roads well. I expected no ambushes on the road, not now that the upworlders were no more. Poppy hauled a bag far too big for her toward the carriage, and Bartholomew picked up the slack, grabbing the drooping end in his jaws and trotting along. While the final preparations were made, I found myself drifting back toward the house. It had looked more forbidding the first time I laid eyes upon it. Now it was merely empty, gutted, the cold hearth and home of only one man. One man who watched us like a fleeting shadow from a high-above window. Gazing up at him, I wondered at his sad eyes, at the confusion and betrayal I saw there. His help had served him faithfully to the last, but even loyalty had its limits. Perhaps I thought he would one day understand why he lived now in abandoned infamy, having gotten his way and finding it wanting. Do you think he will try something? Kent asked, startling me. He put a hand on my back, where he had before, to give me courage. No, I said honestly, watching the devil turn away from me to haunt other empty rooms. No, I don't think he will. We returned to the carriages to find the others bickering over who would ride where. Bartholomew had already claimed a spot in the lighter box, perhaps desirous of the wind in his face. Poppy's choice then was made for her, and Chijioke helped her scamper up to settle in next to the hound. Where do you think he will go when the house is gone? I asked Chijioke. He knew at once who I meant. Where all devils go, he replied with a shrug. Where he is most needed and least expected. Here, he said, opening his hands to me. Let me help you with that. He was implying the pack on my shoulders. I removed it carefully, wincing when it grazed my arm, then stopped him, stooping to pull out the book, which weighed no more than a normal volume. It was larger, however, and far more fantastical, bright green with purple vines growing across it, a stag and spider stamped in the middle. I ran a hand across the leather with a shiver, knowing it was some poor adventurer's hide. A voice shimmered up to me from the pages, deep and relieved, a man's voice. Father. But it did not sound like any memory of him I had. It sounded like a man unbroken, a man made whole, released from the agony of anger. At last, the others had frozen, watching me. I looked at them gathered there, Mary with her tousled brown hair and dainty freckles, Chijioke still waiting to take the bag with outstretched hands, the dark skin of his forearms bandaged heavily from the fight, and Poppy with her beloved dog, both of them leaning out of the phaeton, the little girl with the mark on her face twining one braid expectantly around her finger. Kent leaned against the carriage, lavender eyes inscrutable, his smile kind as he waited and I tarried. Courage, he mouthed to me and I nodded. We are creatures of darkness and curiosity, but there is good in this book, and goodness is powerful. It has always been powerful, only that has been forgotten. I did not know if I spoke Mother's words or my own, but they came freely and with a confidence I had not felt before. This book, our book, will help the world to remember. And goodness. Goodness does not always mean peace. It does not mean weakness. What goodness is in this book and in us will see us through to the north, and then beyond, into our lives. I took a deep breath and let Chijioke take the pack and book, watching it go into his arms with tears filling my eyes. They tried to snuff us out. This was their age of angels and shadows and demons. Now comes our chance, our age, the age of our fury. Here, here, Chijioke shouted, giving me a wink. Now say that all back again when we get to the pub. It demands a toast, eh, lass? I said with a laugh. I promise not to forget a word. Then the book was put into the carriage, and Mary came to take me by the arm, and we took the last few steps together. But after I had taken the step up, I lingered in the open door of the carriage, looking back at Coldthistle House once more, expecting, perhaps hoping to catch one last glimpse of its former master. On the topmost floor, on the most easterly turret, there was a glimmer of yellow eyes. But as soon as they appeared they were gone, a pair of curtains shutting up tight, as if to say the play had ended, as if to say no more, as if to close the place off forever, a lone, forgotten tomb. Epilogue. I walked out one day across County Leitrim and County Sligo, taking not the road but the fields and woods, finding I wanted to be a hidden thing. The mists on the emerald carpets of grass hung low, a fairy twinkle in the dawn light. The pack on my back, heavier than it had ever been, had long since carved ruts in my shoulders. 'Twas all but part of me now, that bag with that book, but I would never be separated from it, it being my eternal burden to bear. A devil walked out in the early morning, across rolling, rolling hills, wildflowers thick along the stone walls, so bright they seemed almost artificial, hothouse perfect, dazzling rows of blue and yellow heads. They marked the way and I followed. Many times I had tried to walk this path, and each time something stopped me. But not this time. My heart, set in stone, would see the journey through. The hissing song of night gave way to the softer morning chatter of distant roosters and closer wrens. There were dunnocks, too, and singing thrush, blackbirds, and doves, all awarble with the promise of a new day. A sad, old creature, decrepit as only the ancient and regretful can be, walked until his feet ached and were bloody. This is how it happened. Night had been blessedly cool, but now it turned to day, and so came the heat, and I stopped for a while to rest on a toppled stone ruin. The lake, undisturbed as glass, spread out behind me, the mountainous woods, and my destination to the east. I watched the sun break over the water and fished out a canteen, helping myself to last night's beer. It was sour but cold enough, and I drank deep, flinching as a buzz began over the horizon, then grew a pointed white object soaring over the lake toward me, low enough to make my bones thrum. I would never get used to those things shooting overhead. Once it would have been a sky snake protecting those skies, now it was only machines. "Are you lost?" It was a tiny voice, and from a girl. I turned to my right, resting the canteen against my side, to find a lass no higher than my knee watching me from the hedges. She seemed a part of the place, while, with tiny flowers dotting her very dark hair. Her eyes, huge and amethyst, watched me with such intelligence that I nearly laughed. Was this a girl or a little fairy creature? Impossible to know. "I might be," I said kindly, reaching into my pack again and coming up with a bit of chocolate I had bought in the last village.